The mic, man. Chill with the mic, man.
All right, we ready for the jury? Okay.
Please, man. Read the chat. She can take the stand now. I don't think she'll take the stand today or tomorrow, but I think I might be wrong. People say tomorrow. I don't think it's gonna be tomorrow either. I don't think they wanted to take the stand either, right? I'm not setting up. Listen, not happening today. Fuck, man.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, be seated. All right, the plaintiff has rested in the defense case. Your witness?
Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Don Hughes to the stand.
Dr. Hughes.
I've been subbed for 35 months aware.
Dr. Hughes?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this case for penalty of law? Yes, I do.
2 years holy year.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Chat, what's your full name? I forgot. Is that Debbie? Who the fuck is that?
Your Honor, will you please state your name? Dawn Hughes. And what is your
Dawn.
profession?
I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist.
And where is
Another
your
one.
practice located?
I practice in New York City.
What is a clinical psychologist?
Sure. So a clinical psychologist is somebody who assesses, evaluates, and treats individuals who are suffering from a variety of ailments or problems that they have in their lives. It could be a major psychiatric disorder, and it could be problems in living. Clinical psychologists also participate in training, in education, and in research ventures.
And what is a forensic psychologist?
So a forensic psychologist is someone who applies the science and principles of clinical psychologists to a particular legal question at hand.
And please describe your background in terms of your education, please.
She looks mean, but...
So I received my bachelor degree in psychology from Hamilton College, which is in upstate New York. I then received my master's degree and my PhD from Nova Southeastern University, which is in Florida. I then had to complete my year-long internship, and that was at Yale University in the School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry. And there I did 2 full-year rotations. I did a year rotation in the Substance Abuse Treatment Unit and another year rotation in the West Haven Mental Health Clinic, where we saw individuals suffering from a wide array of difficulties in psychiatric
Not Miss Curry.
illnesses.
I sleep.
After that, I had to
Sorry.
complete my postdoctoral fellowship, which is another year that's required in order to get licensed. And that was back in New York at Cornell Medical College in the Anxiety and Traumatic Stress program there.
Please describe your training and experience in psychology and trauma.
So my experience in trauma has been predominantly throughout graduate school. I started at a domestic violence program that was housed within our community mental health center of the university. And that program, we saw both men and women who were coming through the program. The majority of the men were court-ordered for batterers intervention programs to participate in mostly group therapy because of their behavior in intimate partner violence, domestic violence. We also treated the female victims who were victims of intimate partner violence mostly in individual therapy, but we did run some groups there as well. After that practicum experience, I went to work at the Veterans Administration in their outpatient psychiatry clinic. And in that clinic,
Okay.
I treated mostly, this was Florida, so they're much older adults. So we saw a lot of Vietnam-era veterans and actually World War II veterans in that program, and a few of veterans
What was the
who served
question?
combat in the first Iraq War. Sort of overlapping in that time, I also was the research coordinator for the Child Sex Abuse Survivors Program.
Yeah, she
and that
said
was also
the
a
females were
treatment
all
program
victims
that was
and the
housed
males were all
within that
court-ordered.
same
I assume
community
that's,
mental health center. And we saw individuals, both men and women, who were coming for treatment to deal with the consequences, the psychological after effects of having been sexually abused as a child. After that, I completed my internship when I was at Yale at the substance abuse program.
I literally just said it. What you said?
There's a high concordance, a high rate of trauma-based disorders with substance abuse. I put together a women's group of female heroin addicts.
Said most men were court-ordered, and women,
domestic
I don't know if she said all,
violence, childhood abuse histories. So we did a dual
women
substance
were
abuse harm
victims, which is
reduction model.
it's not take.
The healing from the traumatic effects of the violence that they experienced. On my postdoctoral fellowship, I was in the anxiety and traumatic stress program. As the name sounds, we saw individuals who were suffering from trauma-based disorders and anxiety, mostly late adolescents and adults, men and women, from sexual assault, violence. Some were simple assaults on the streets, being mugged, and things of that nature. I also did teaching and training for Victim Services, which is New York City's largest victim-based organization who runs a lot of services for victims of domestic violence and shelter-based programs. And I did some education and training for them and teaching for a number of years.
Thank you. Let's talk about your current occupation. What positions do you currently hold?
So I currently have a private practice in Manhattan, and I also have a faculty position at Weill Cornell Medical College. I'm a clinical assistant professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry.
Here she goes again.
This is what we call on the voluntary faculty, which means you don't get paid, but you participate in bringing in the interns, selecting the interns for that year. In that program, I teach, I think for the past 7-8 years, the ethics seminar to the interns, and also participate in other didactics that they have. I'm also called upon
the current
to
position, and she
sort of
talks about
troubleshoot difficult scenarios that clinicians, either trainees or full-blood clinicians, might have if there's an issue of intimate partner violence or child sex abuse, and they don't really know sort of what to do in that situation. I get consulted to do that. And then most recently, I was part of our program's COVID response team, where in pretty much March, April, May, June, July 2020, where New York City was the epicenter.
Guys, can a jury vote to kick
sort of
it?
Mobilized, and we're really doing psychological first aid and helping our hospital-based workers deal with the stress and the trauma from seeing so much death and destruction because of COVID in those first months of New York City's COVID wave.
I wonder if she's going to get the job or not.
What does your independent practice entail?
No!
So my independent practice is predominantly, I say 3 things. The bulk is I see individuals in therapy, 2.5 days. I see people who come to my office who are mostly dealing from the traumatic effects of victimization, childhood abuse, rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence. And I see these individuals in therapy. I do have a percentage of individuals who do not have a trauma history, and that's usually the anxiety disorders that I see. They may have panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder or other difficulties and just relational difficulties or problems in living. The second big part of what I do is this.
Guys,
psychology.
I was watching the behind the scenes today.
I evaluate individuals
what happened is that
who were
he
involved
was playing the elite new boss of balloons,
I consult with
and he got smoked. He's putting money back in to get some monkey money.
Cases,
so he could buy back in.
Just something that has to do with the legal system. And then the other smaller percentage is the engagement in professional activities in the profession.
Says me. Good one, dude.
Do you have any areas that you specialize in?
Yes, I specialize in interpersonal violence and traumatic stress.
And what is interpersonal violence?
So interpersonal violence is the umbrella term for when one person does something violent or abusive toward another. And that includes domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse, rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, physical assault. All of those type of behaviors we understand as interpersonal violence. And then the traumatic stress is the consequence of that. What happens to individuals when they experience these sort of life-altering events, these really adverse life events? Traumatic stress is one of the outgrowths and the psychological consequences that people have when they've been exposed to these type of traumas.
So intimate partner violence, rape, and sexual assault are major areas of your focus of practice?
That's
Is that fair
correct.
to say?
Objection leading.
I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. I'll just move on. What types of patients do you treat in your private office?
So I treat adults, mostly men and women in my practice. I sometimes will treat late adolescents, 17 or 18. They'll come to me usually after a rape or sexual assault, and I'll treat them in short-term
We
treatment.
get it, my brother.
But mostly adults who are, have sustained some kind of traumatic event in their lives.
Approximately how many victims of interpersonal violence have you examined or personally interviewed?
chill
over
out.
the
This is
course
hard
of your
stalling, though.
career?
Hundreds upon hundreds.
And how many years have you been practicing?
Well, I started practicing in graduate school in 1992, and I was licensed in 1996, so 25, 30 years.
Okay. Are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
Please describe to the jury what board certification means and what you are certified in.
Board certification is the highest degree of postdoctoral certification that a psychologist can obtain. And I am board certified in forensic psychology, and that means that I have just amassed a competency in the area of forensic psychology.
And are you licensed to practice psychology?
Yes, I am.
And in how many states are you licensed?
I'm licensed in 3 states, in New York, North Carolina, and Connecticut, and then I have some temporary licenses in other states as well.
Have you published in the area of your
Guys,
specialization?
this is literally an interview for a
I
job.
have. I am not predominantly a researcher or somebody who writes. I'm a clinician. I'm doing direct clinical service. But over the course of my graduate school and postdoctoral time, I have published some things, yes.
And have you published a book chapter relating
This is
to
what
rape
Chet
and
thinks about this
sexual
voice.
assault?
Objection
have.
leading.
Overruled.
Yes, I have rape and sexual assault in adult women.
And have you published any book chapters relating to structured or clinical assessment of risk or violence?
Yes, I co-authored a book chapter entitled
1.5
Structured
star
Clinical
rating.
Assessment of Risk and Violence.
Okay. Have you given any other trainings or presentations to mental health professionals in the area of trauma and abuse?
Yes, I've
What's your
given
name again?
many trainings at national conferences, at legal conferences
Dawn?
for attorneys, for mental health professionals, on understanding trauma and how trauma may show up in the courtroom, on understanding what a victim of intimate partner violence might look like, of understanding the difficulties that a rape victim might have to come into court to testify. And training just regular sort of mental health professionals on how to understand trauma, how to look for trauma, what does it look like when it comes into your
I'll see
office,
it.
how do you treat it, how do you assess it. All of those factors I've done a number of trainings on.
Have you been invited on any occasions to train attorneys and judges on trauma and violence?
Yes, I have. I was invited by the Judicial Conference to
Oh, she
be
got
part
review
of the
bombed
training
already.
curriculum to train our New York State Supreme Court justices on issues of intimate partner violence and traumatic stress. Some of the things that I've just been talking to you here about how to understand what happens in those situations, how to understand the myths and misconceptions that may abound in these situations, and how you can sort of more accurately understand what a victim is talking to you about and telling you when they come into your courtroom.
Have you given any presentations to judicial symposiums on domestic violence?
Yes, I've also been, contacted by, sometimes judges will have symposiums in their courtroom. They will make a decision to hold a particular symposium on particular topics, and I was, asked to come to presentations for judges on numerous occasions.
And what, if any, presentations did you do on understanding women's use of force in IPV?
That was a recent presentation. I think that was invited by one of the one of the judges of the Office on Domestic Violence in New York. And the title is When Women Use Force
I
in
watched
Situations of Intimate
Miss
Partner
Curry did
Violence.
one.
And my
It was
topic
not like
was
this.
to talk about the
Kind of, but-
complexities of that issue and what does that look like and how can we differentiate if both people are fighting, how do we know that this is intimate partner violence? So what does the research tell us about that? How do we understand that and how can we really accurately assess that? And that was sort of the bulk of what that training was about.
Cool.
What professional organizations do you belong to?
Oh, please, man.
I belong to a number. I belong to the American Psychological Association, which is the largest body of psychologists in the United States, over here, headquarters in D.C. Because it's so big, there are subdivisions of the American Psychological Association. So I belong to the Division of Trauma Psychology. I belong to the Division of Psychology and the Law, the Division of Psychology and Private Practice. I belong to other organizations, the International Society
isn't that her
Stress
psychologist?
Studies, which, as the name says, it's an international society where we are interdisciplinary, mostly psychiatry and psychology, researchers and clinicians, to really understand and further our awareness about trauma and traumatic stress. I belong to the International Society for Trauma and Dissociation. I belong to the Anxiety Disorders of Association of America. I'm a fellow in the American Board of Forensic Psychology. I don't know if I'm forgetting any.
Okay. Are any of these specific to interpersonal violence or trauma?
Well, clearly the trauma division of the American Psychological Association, the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, and the International Society for Trauma and Dissociation, and then also the Anxiety Disorders of Association continues to talk about trauma. Because prior to this new DSM-5, PTSD was originally categorized under the anxiety disorders. So there are still colleagues and researchers in the anxiety disorders organizations who talk about PTSD and trauma.
Do you hold any leadership roles in these organizations?
Yes, I am currently the president-elect of the Trauma Division of the American Psychological Association. That is an elected position. You have to be elected by our membership. And now I serve as with the presidential trio. So there's three of us. You serve with the immediate past president, the current president, and the president-elect. So it's a 3-year term. And
I'm just very curious what kind of strategy you're going to use to bring her in here.
Disseminate best practices in trauma psychology and also interface
I feel like
with the larger
they're going to
American
cook
Psychological Association organization.
Guys, my prediction, she gets absolutely fucking cooked on the flip side.
Just a voice for trauma psychology with our larger body and policy making. I've been involved in the Trauma Psychology Executive Board since its inception. I was a founding member of that division. I served as a membership chair, a program chair, an awards chair. I was the APA Council of Representatives.
Imagine you're an employer and she shows up with her resume and it's a fucking stack. It's a booklet with an author, fucking writer and shit, the whole wazoo, man.
Trauma psychology.
So the Division of Trauma Psychology are psychologists who come together who want to disseminate best practices in trauma psychology. We want to make sure that we have our finger on the pulse of research and evidence-based interventions for people who are struggling with traumatic events that have happened to them.
By time for us to get on stand.
Have you served in leadership positions of other professional organizations?
Yes, I was. There's a New York City-based organization. It's called the Women's Mental Health Consortium, and that's also an interdisciplinary organization. It's psychology, psychiatry, nursing, social work, and this was formed in order to give women sort of a referral base and more information about mostly like reproductive psychiatry. We know that certain difficulties and psychological difficulties that you have can erupt when you're pregnant or postpartum. So we wanted to have a number of resources available to women in the New York City area. I was a membership chair there for a number of years, and then I was the president of that organization, I think 2009 to 2017. I don't have my CV, but I think that's about right.
Why is participation in professional organizations important in your field?
Well, it's important to me because I do believe very much in service. I do believe very much in giving back. I do believe that it's important as a psychologist who believes strongly
If she believes in giving back,
psychology and
then why didn't you tell Amber to donate the fucking 3.5 mil that she says we donate to the fucking hospital?
Push to get policy and understanding, especially with the insurance companies, to make sure that people are getting, the appropriate care that they deserve. So it's something that just has always been part of my life in varying degrees. And as a psychologist, I feel like it's a very rewarding.
Oh, now he's drawing. Look at this.
Do you attend professional conferences?
Yes, I do. Typically,
the
multiple
hands
times
aren't moving.
a year. Of course,
Yeah,
COVID threw a little
he's
bit of
coloring
a wrench in
it.
that.
He's
Some things are
coloring
virtual,
it.
But yes, I routinely attend conferences.
And why do you think that's important?
It's important to stay abreast of developments in the field. It's important to meet with your colleagues across the country and see what they're doing and what they're hearing and what's working and what's not working. So when you're at a conference and somebody's presenting new or novel research, then you can take that information and bring that back to your clients and bring that back to my forensic work. So it absolutely enhances the work that I do.
Have you ever been qualified to testify in the field of psychology as an expert witness?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
I was first qualified in 1998, so since then, about 50 times.
Okay. And how often in that 50 times has the specialty been in interpersonal violence and traumatic stress?
Probably more than half.
Okay.
Have
Have you ever worked for or testified for the prosecution in criminal matters, like the district attorney's office, U.S. attorney's office?
Yes, I have, frequently.
Okay. Do you testify for both sides in lawsuits, plaintiffs and defendants?
Yes, I do.
Have you ever worked on other cases that didn't go to trial?
Many.
Okay. Have you ever found an individual that you evaluated
Jesus Christ.
did not suffer from the effects of interpersonal violence or PTSD?
Stop. Guys, I thought it would be...
Frequently.
I thought you guys were only linked...
Have you ever
What is wrong with you guys?
not been
Why do you guys do that shit?
qualified in court where you have been proffered to qualify as an expert in the court?
No.
Guys,
Your Honor, I would at this time
I'm not encouraging it. What's wrong with you?
As an expert
Don't
in
do shit like that.
psychology with a specialization
Leacock said
in
it.
interpersonal violence and
Leacock
traumatic
said
stress.
he linked it straight up.
No
I clicked
objection
it.
to
It
qualifying
looked
as
fine.
an
I
expert
scroll. It's full of
forensic
XCLs.
More specifically, forensic psychology with a specialization in interpersonal violence.
It was good content. I pulled it up. It changed to by XCLs.
No.
Literally.
All right, so moved.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Hughes, please tell the jury what domestic violence, intimate partner violence means.
They'll remove him. Remove yours, chat.
Sure.
Don't
So
be worried.
I'm probably going to be interchanging the language, domestic violence and interpersonal violence. And for purposes here, these are the same thing. So intimate partner violence is a pattern of manipulation, fear, and coercive control that happens within an intimate relationship. It constitutes using a variety of abusive behaviors, and that can be physical violence, sexual violence, psychological aggression, emotional abuse, stalking or surveillance behaviors, and economic abuse.
That's violence?
The abusive behaviors occur over time, not
Guys,
all at once. And
I
they're
want-
also
I wanna be a
interspersed
contrarian, I'm
with
just
very
asking.
normal times, times without violence, times with love and happiness.
Okay.
And
Actually
it's this
falling asleep, oh my God.
interpositioning of the violence with the love and the abuse, with the love and the care, that makes it very difficult for a victim to extricate herself from that situation and from that relationship.
Fair enough.
And what would you say is the overarching dynamic of these relationships?
So the overarching dynamic is the abuse of power and control of one person wanting to have dominance in that relationship, say over most things
Didn't they put
Guys,
an
the
emphasis
couple
on
or
Economic
the
abuse is
victim
true here.
does or does not
thinking
do.
emoji?
Please tell the jury what coercive control means.
So coercive control is a tactic of victimization. The goal of it is to establish dominance. What coercive control does is that it imposes negative
She's
consequences
a keeper.
for
Just
noncompliance
keep
with your
her mouth
partner's
shut.
expectations or demands. And what that does is it erodes away at the victim's autonomy and her independence.
What is physical violence?
So physical violence is when one person uses their body against the body of another with the intent to cause injury or harm. That can
Let's
be
not forget all
push,
of her.
shove,
First of her
slap,
name, Queen
kick,
of the Andals of the
punch,
First Men,
beat up, maybe
Protector of the
multiple
Seven Kingdoms,
types
the Mother of Dragons, the
physicality
Khaleesi
in
of the
one
Great
instance.
Grass Seat, the Unburned.
Throw, slam into a wall, push into something hard that you could hurt yourself. Clearly, use of a weapon would be a physically violent act as well.
Does size and strength matter between the parties?
Nope.
Yes, very much so.
Well, it really
this
doesn't.
is very well documented in the literature about violence and abuse in relationships, and that's just physics. That's just proportional force.
I would just think that violence is violence.
A 185-pound man is going to push a 120-pound
How am I dumb?
woman. That's going to feel quite
I thought
different
violence is
than a
violence.
120-pound woman pushing a 185-pound man. And it's just about proportional force and the size and strength differential. And that is why specifically, if you look at wrestling or boxing, they match weight classes. And they do that for a reason, because they know that it's not fair if somebody is bigger and stronger.
If it's not
than
fair,
them. So
what?
it's certainly not the only factor, but it is a factor that one has to consider if a relationship is violent.
Who the fuck is boxing?
What is psychological aggression?
So psychological aggression is threats and the imposition of threats with the intent to control someone's behavior. So it's doing a threat so that you will modify
She's
your
taller
behavior
than he
and
is.
do what your partner wants. Some psychological
How am I
aggression
dumb?
techniques
I don't-
are intimidation. Slamming your hand on a table, punching a wall, throwing something, mumbling under your mouth, cursing,
I don't think I'm
screaming,
wrong.
sort of these
To
these
describe
high
something
emotional balance
as physically
type of
violent,
activities that can cause a victim to
size
feel
or fairness of the
afraid
fight
and
doesn't
feel
matter.
intimidated. And
It's a
then if
violent
there has
behavior or
been,
not.
an act of physical violence where that contingency has already been established, that this person, your partner, has said, okay, I not only have the ability to use violence against you, I also have the willingness to do it. The intimidating tactics take on greater flavor. They take on greater salience. They
So what are you supposed to do
mean
then?
more because you know.
Take
what
5
could be
punches
coming
because
down
they're
the pike.
83
What is
pounds
emotional abuse?
lighter.
So emotional
and
abuse
now I'm gonna strike back.
functions to denigrate
Unfairness.
a person's
Bang.
sense
What
of
the fuck is that?
self-worth and their self perception. It's about name calling,
Small person.
being very mean-spirited, putting yourself down.
This is in violence.
using gender-based
Bang.
language
Violence.
that's offensive,
What
racial
is that?
slurs, all types of behaviors to really make a person feel less than they actually should.
And what is sexual abuse?
So sexual abuse in an intimate relationship functions to establish dominance and establish power. What it is simply in the psychological and psychiatric communities is forcing someone to do something sexual against your will when you did not want to. It can be forced sex, either forced vaginal, oral, anal sex, and be forced to engage in any other type of sexual act that you may not want to do. And when I say force, it doesn't mean it has to have physical force. There's a lot of psychologically coercive tactics that are used that many times when violence has already been established in the relationship, the victim often feels that she can't say no for fear of reprisal, for fear of retaliation, for saying no to those acts. So sexual abuse, does happen in intimate partner relationships. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to ask about it because it makes people very uncomfortable.
Is digital penetration of the vagina sexual abuse?
Action leading.
You said she.
What, if any, role does digital
Guys,
penetration
but
of the vagina
this I think it's the
play
second or
in
third time she
sexual
does this.
abuse?
Second or third.
If it is non-consensual, then it is abusive.
I don't want to be
What if any
sexist Andy, but I
penetration
mean,
of inanimate objects into the vagina plays a role in sexual abuse.
Again, the operative word is consensual. If you are not consenting to those acts, then it is sexually abusive.
Is there a distinction between sexual violence and sexual abuse?
Not really. Sexual violence is a term of art. It is the overarching umbrella that we in the psychological and psychiatric communities talk about. So if we are looking at our diagnostic and statistical manual and say what are the traumas that could cause PTSD, it's listed as sexual violence. So it's an umbrella term that allows us to understand it could be childhood sexual abuse, it could be a rape, a sexual assault, it can be sexual abuse in an intimate relationship. So it's really just an overarching term that we use in the field.
What are
I'm sorry. So it doesn't mean, I think people often mistake it to mean that when you are being sexually abused, that someone's punching you or someone's hitting you or someone's doing something like that because you hear the violence. It does not mean that. That could happen, but that term does not require that, nor does it mean that.
What are stalking or surveillance behaviors?
So stalking and surveillance behaviors are a common tactic of typically men who use violent behaviors in an intimate relationship. What they do is they allow the woman to know that wherever she is, wherever she goes, he's going to know. I'm going to maybe look at your phone, see who you're talking to, track you on Find My iPhone, look
Typically
at your
men.
Instagram, look at
I'm
your
actually impressed by that.
emails.
Guys, don't get mad at you guys. Don't get mad at her for pulling up stats if the stats aren't wrong. I'm impressed that I didn't know that.
Again, erodes the victim's autonomy and it erodes her sense of privacy. She doesn't feel that wherever she can go,
I would have thought 50-50 on
not
this.
going to be part of her life in a very objectionable way. Sometimes there's the pop-ins. They'll show up at places that they're not supposed to be and that we don't want them to be, just as a way of checking. Sometimes they'll have friends or family check up on their partners to make sure where they are. What time did you get home? But you didn't turn off your phone at this time, but you came in the door
Guys,
this
it's
time.
hard to follow the
Like all
dialogue
of this sort of
because they're
constant
gish galloping
questioning and
between
interrogation
stalking
about, an individual's
and other
whereabouts.
behaviors that aren't stalking it. So
What
some
about
apply to women
economic abuse? What is
more,
that?
which is true.
So economic
but then we're
abuse is
swapping
a way to,
over. So
again,
it's kind of hard to
continue
follow.
Maintain control over
She's
your
just-
intimate
they're-
partner.
they're just
Sometimes
spamming.
it's withholding information about the finances, of not letting you have access to the finances. If you can't have access to a credit card or a checking account or, Apple Pay on your phone, then you're rendered usually much more economically dependent on your partner, and that limits tangible options for you. For
Yeah.
individuals where
Guys.
that sort of tangible options isn't there, we see the economic abuse or the economic restriction when one partner refuses to share any information about the funds. So it's not like I can't go shopping because I won't have money, but I don't have any decision-making in our family money. I don't have any idea of what we're doing in our family vis-a-vis our finances. So it's a way of definitely keeping that very separate and not in a consensual. Some couples make that choice. One person does all the money, that's fine. But when it doesn't come from a place of consensual choice-making, it can be abusive.
So you just described a number of these abusive behaviors. Are all of them present in every domestic violence relationship?
Right. No, they're not all present in everyone, and that's why it's very important to do a thorough assessment of a relationship that may be mired in violence to see which ones are present and which ones have a great impact in the relationship, which ones are sort of making the structure of this relationship.
After a sexual assault in an intimate relationship, how might a victim in those circumstances interact with her partner?
So this is one of the myths that people say, well, if she was sexually assaulted by her partner, she would have just left. And nothing could be further from the truth. That's not what happens, especially when it's your husband or your boyfriend or your partner. So what women do is they bury it.
Yes, four times now, 4 times.
They put it away, they avoid it, because then they continue to reach out
4 times.
for the kind and the loving man that they got into this relationship with. The problem is that it does fester belief and causes more sort of psychological distress in the victim.
What, if any, role can shame or humiliation play in this coercive dynamic?
So that's one of the emotions that the victim is usually trying to suppress and compartmentalize and avoid and put away. One of the most frequently felt feelings after something so incredibly humiliating and violating is shame. And shame is a very sort of difficult emotion for people to have to live with and to have to experience. And then a lot of times what we see in these relationships, especially ones where sexual assault is perpetrated, there's typically the emotional abuse as well. So now if you're called names like a whore and a slut and easy and fat, and you're feeling the shame from the sexual assault that just happened.
These are all terms that apply to, I'm not even gonna.
So it kind of slowly deteriorates the psychological functioning of the victim, and where they're just really trying to get back to the good guy, guy to come back, but they're suffering these symptoms underneath.
What about intimidation? What role does intimidation play in the coercive control dynamic?
And intimidation is one of the huge
she's right,
factors
but
that we see in coercive control. Again,
it's a
the
simple
goal
concept.
is to get your partner to do
It's
what
how
you want
lenient
them
she
to
is
do.
and how often she's doing
it.
it.
Establish that you can use violence and other sexual violence and physical violence, slamming your hand on a table, throwing a glass, breaking a door, throwing anything, causing a fit, yelling and screaming. That can rise the fear level in a victim that she may modify her behavior quicker, and he might not need to use physical violence because he's already established that fear is there.
What, if any, role could writing obscene messages play in being considered intimidating behavior?
Objection leading.
I said, what
Christ, she is
Overruled.
I mean, certainly writing obscene messages to your partner could absolutely be an intimidating behavior.
What, if any, role does emotional abuse or degradation play in the dynamics?
So emotional abuse and degradation, as I
Christ,
stated
man.
before, functions to decrease your sense of self-worth. It decreases your sense of agency. It makes you feel bad about yourself. And when you feel bad about
Guys,
yourself,
I'm gonna be honest.
you're less
With
likely
all the
to
she and he and what she's
actualize
saying,
and see options for
the
leaving.
thing about
You're so
fairness and
sort of mired
violence
in,
now kind
in
of-
this dynamic of abuse.
It's kind of worrying now. I feel like
sometimes to believe
this is
bad things
really
that the
worrying.
person is telling you about. So maybe I am not talented and fat and lazy and stupid.
Her perspective on
and
it.
interferes with that ability to problem solve and figure out, can I get out of this relationship? And sometimes you feel you don't even deserve to get out of the relationship when
right.
the abuse
How
is
is
so
she right, though?
chronic and so repetitive.
What role does surveillance as a means of control play in that dynamic?
So surveillance.
Objection leading.
I don't think that's leading, Your Honor.
Overruled, go ahead.
So surveillance functions to let the victim know wherever you are, there I am. So it makes her feel not secure in her movement, feeling that she has to restrict her movement. Her movement is not hers alone. It usually increases hypervigilance.
Who said he or her?
It increases fear. It increases the need for
he
yourself to
knows, I
mark
feel
where
like it.
you've been and what you've done so that you can go back and prove it to your partner because you know that there is going to be an interrogation later. When this pattern has been established, show receipts, show me your iPhone. Where were you? What's your Google location at? Those are some types of surveillance behaviors that puts
How
the
is she
victim very
right?
much
She's
on
all
edge
she's
and
saying.
increases that
She
level
and
of anxiety and trepidation.
What role does possessive jealousy play in these relationships?
So possessive jealousy is a very difficult dynamic in intimate partner
how
violence.
hard is it
It's
to remain
very
neutral?
common in situations of coercive control. It's rooted in possession.
The stats don't matter.
Gentleman feels that he can possess her. And
Men
that he can
and women are
have
both
her
victim
whenever he
of
wants. It's very
anything that she
possessive
said.
dynamic.
All of it.
But the accusations,
why is one completely
the problem
being
is when you
downplayed
make the
to the
accusations,
point where it's not
the woman's
non-existent?
forced to refute the accusations. So they're continuing in this dynamic where she's trying to prove, I didn't do what you said, this didn't happen. And then,
No,
unfortunately,
it doesn't apply to the
sometimes it
situation or the
escalates
case.
because the
She's
man
being
is not
asked
taking the
questions
no financially
unrelated to the
because
case
this is
that are black on white.
Asseverative obsessive pattern.
Unrelated.
It's very difficult
Come
to
on, man.
penetrate, that often these type of conversations lend themselves to physical and sexual violence.
Does this dynamic happen overnight?
No, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. We don't, a woman doesn't get into a relationship with a man who's beating her up and sexually assaulting her and calling her names and doing all that. She gets into the relationships for all the right reasons, just like we all get into relationships for love, for companionship, for kindness, for a future. But then slowly, all of these behaviors start to take form. And I always say it's sort of like sucking the oxygen out of the room. And then before you know it, you're suffocating.
Yeah, now I'm getting annoyed. I can only imagine the jury at this point.
Brings me to my next question. what role do physical abuse and coercive tactics play interspersed with normalcy and positive moments?
Objection compound.
I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. Yeah, I'll figure this out some way. What role does love and normalcy play in these dynamics you've been describing?
Objection compound.
Overruled.
Thank you.
So love and
Same.
normalcy are almost always in these relationships. That, when you are in a lull and the violence is not happening, you're back to sort of the loving man that you wanted, the person who you wanted to be with. And when you pair sort of this this violent dynamic, physical violence, sexual violence, with love and attachment, it creates a trauma bond.
Dude, what the fuck is happening?
Bond. An emotional dependency is created. So it makes it very difficult for the victim of the abuse to sort of extricate herself from that relationship, and for her to even believe, frankly, that takes a lot of time to even believe that she can and that she should.
And what, if any, role does that dynamic you describe have?
Guys,
in
am I
the
crazy?
victim thinking they can
Guys,
fix
am I
the
just being
problem?
ignorant about something that I don't know that's happening,
So
and why
what do
she's
we
doing
know
this,
from the
or is it
research?
just she's being like this?
The research with working with battered men who come into treatment is that the only person who can change the abuse is the abuser. So no matter what the tactics that the woman uses, she's trying to do all these different things to fix him, to have him not be violent, to have him not be sexually violent, to have him not be obsessively jealous. And all those things don't change his behavior because it's up to him to change his behavior. And this was played out a million times in the batterers intervention groups that I led. And the men would tell us, it doesn't matter what she does. I don't care.
Depp is going down.
So the problem is that the woman continues to think that she can fix it, and yet she can't.
This is
But
fucking
she's the one who's
disgusting.
then rendered sort of helpless and hopeless because everything that she's trying to do is failing.
She's
What is
just
the cycle of
disgusting.
violence?
So the cycle of violence is one way to describe this domestic violence pattern. Typically what we see, and the cycle can be different in a variety of
Am
relationships.
I neutral?
But typically what we see
I don't have
is
to be.
in the first
I'm not a
phase,
lawyer
sort of
or an
multiple 3 to
expert.
4 phases. In the first phase, there's a tension building phase. You're sort of starting to feel that apprehension. He may be throwing his papers on the table
Guys,
a little more. He may be slamming
this
the
is civil court.
fridge door a little more. He may be
there's a
mumbling
jury.
under his mouth a little
think
more.
people aren't paying attention
He
to
may
this?
grab a glass a little more forcefully than he normally is. And then there's the incident phase. Then there's the blow up, where the violence,
Her
the abuse,
examples,
the screaming,
males to females,
the
is like
sexual violence, the
99 to
physical
0.
violence, all that occurs. Then we come to the contrition phase. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. It wasn't me. I'm not going to do it again. The promises for change. And then we sort of slide into the calm phase where, this isn't going to happen again. I'm back to stable ground. I'm going to live in this place, this sort of honeymoon place. The problem in the calm phase is we often see the rationalizations and the justifications for the behavior. It's not like typically the man is taking full responsibility for what he did, but it's calm because there's no, violence and no sort of tension at that moment. And then it recurs. And then it recurs. So you're stuck in this vicious cycle of trying to figure out how can I be with this man who hurts me, and yet I love him so much.
And what, if anything, does the term love bomb mean?
So the love bombing is, it's more of the colloquial term for the younger folks here, but, where you shower someone with affection and love, in this contrition and calm phase where, you're, everything about you is special. You're the best thing in the world. I'm never going to do anything to hurt you again. I would never let anyone hurt
love
you.
bomb.
It could be sending flowers and buying gifts or going on trips or your favorite restaurant. And that is, a way of where the man is trying to make those amends. And then it gets the woman hooked. So they get hooked on the kindness. They get hooked on the love. They don't get hooked on the abuse. I've never met one woman in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that I've evaluated who was not concerned about the violence.
man
They're all
and the
concerned
woman.
about the violence. But they go for the love.
Guys, only men can love bomb. Women don't do that. They just don't.
In
It's
your experience,
expert here is telling us
with
that. Thank you.
these
I'm learning
dynamics that
today.
you've
Thank you.
described,
I'm writing this down.
Does the victim ever yell at her partner?
Absolutely.
Why?
We
They
know
do.
from the
Nope.
research
Are you an
that
expert?
women
She is.
use
She knows better.
verbal and physical acts of aggression.
Yes, I was
in
just
these
joking. Of course
relationships.
you-
That's not
like-
uncommon. This has been researched for 5 decades. And a woman may yell at her partner because she's angry. And anger is a very normal emotion to having been abused. She can also be afraid, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive. We can absolutely, as human beings, feel 2 or 3 or 4 different emotions.
This is worrisome
at once.
because
What
if she's saying
people
this,
do often say to
if
me,
this
she
is
would
what
never
she
yell at him
says
if she knew he was going to hit her.
publicly, imagine the way that she
That's
conducts
not
herself
true.
and
That's just patently
thinks
not true.
and talks
that's not
in
supported in
private.
the research,
I
and
don't
that's
know.
not supported in my clinical practice. You know, the problem is there's a classic double bind, and the violence has been so normalized in the relationship now. She gets hit if she does yell. She gets hit if she doesn't yell. So for women who feel at certain moments that they need to preserve some sense of their autonomy and their independence and stand up for themselves, they will yell and they will fight back, even though the risk of violence is there. So it doesn't mean that she's not afraid and that she's not concerned about the violence. And it doesn't mean she doesn't also use placating and compliance strategies most of the time as well.
oh my God.
Does in the cases that you have and in your experience, does the abuse typically take place in front of others?
Really
We
did.
talk about behind closed doors. Most of the intimate partner violence, the domestic violence,
Sorry, my language is good quality. Unless
violence happens, you know, in the privacy of your own home. So sometimes we see the remnants of it, the after effects, or victims talk to their friends or family about it, but very rarely are you seeing it happen, the actual blow-up phase happen in the middle of witnesses and other people.
What's the term bystander effect mean?
So bystander effect means what happens when people are aware that domestic violence is happening. What happens when they're aware, even if they're not seeing it, that it could be happening. And what happens is we know that it's very difficult for people to stand up and say something. It's very difficult, especially in situations where there's a larger community of folks and the person who perhaps is perpetrating the abuse is the leader of that community. It becomes very difficult to go up against that, to go up against the sort of the head honcho of the community. People are very fearful of losing their jobs. I've seen this time and time again in the cases that I've worked on.
now it's gonna
You know,
calibrate.
the Boy Scout cases or the clergy abuse cases, you know, all of those type of cases where the USA Gymnastics, where when we go back and we look, we see people knew, but the secretary doesn't want to lose her job. She has kids to feed. The guy who, you know, checks you in, he doesn't want to lose his job because he has a mortgage to pay. So people are quiet and they don't say anything. You know, and then other people are very, it's a very worrisome dynamic. They don't want to put their foot out there if they're wrong. And
The only
maybe I didn't
heat that
see
we
it
finally
right,
get
or I
is the
don't
one where
really
the
know what
guy
happened. I
should
certainly am
report,
not gonna
but he
jeopardize
doesn't.
my job if I don't really know what happened
Thank you.
behind closed doors, even if I see a trashed room or a bruise. And then people still believe it's a family matter. You know, it's between Amber and Johnny. Let them figure it out. You know, I'm not going to get in the middle. So those are dynamics that happen.
What's the objection?
Motion to strike.
What's the objection?
We identified 2 names in the answer.
Overruled. Next.
Thank you. Did you finish your answer?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. What about mutual abuse? What is that? What role does that play?
So mutual abuse isn't really a term of art that we use. What we look at is situational couple violence and intimate partner violence. And when we look at situational couple violence, that really does characterize the majority of types of violence and abuse that happens in relationships. That's when a couple gets out of hand. They may push, shove, slap, yell, say some things that they don't want. And it's not that those behaviors are okay, but those are sort of what our larger scale community-based studies say happens in these relationships. That's distinguished from intimate partner violence, what I'm talking to you about, that has this constellation of symptoms and is rooted in the abuse of power and control.
Is there research that addresses this mutual abuse?
Yeah, there's research that addresses what does gender symmetry look like, male and female. Are they the same? And there's certainly, as I said, research that on the
we get
The
paid to
lower
watch this?
end types of violent behaviors, push, shove, slap, we may see similar rates between men and women. In psychological aggression, yelling, name calling, putting down, in some of our big community scale studies, we may see similar rates of perpetration in those behaviors.
Oh, wow.
But then there are, other situations where we don't have gender symmetry. And what the research talks about very clearly is you have to examine context. You have to examine the differential of power and control and coercive control in the relationship to make a full determination.
Do women use violence in relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we've known this for 5 decades in our research. We've been studying this since the 70s. And when we look at what happens,
just trying to pull her back in.
women do report their use of violence. The majority of violence that we do see is what we call reactive violence or self-defensive violence, or sometimes violence that's perpetrated independently of an assault, of something that's going on. But mostly that when the partner begins to become violent, then she may become violent and fight back. And that's not an uncommon dynamic, that if somebody is being pushed or shoved or hit, that a person would fight back. That has been established in the research.
And what, if any, effect does that have on changing the power dynamics or the structure?
Well, you have to find out, does it? Does her use of violence change the overarching power structure of coercive control and violence and abuse in this relationship? And you have to examine those variables to see, does it or does it not?
Can men be victims of intimate partner violence?
Absolutely. Certainly, we know that we have to be careful of gendered stereotypes. We can't go in and think, only the woman is the victim, and only the man is the perpetrator. That just does not comport with the research. We know that the research also shows that we can have domestic violence in same-sex relationships. My very first case was a same-sex domestic violence homicide in Brooklyn. That was in 1998. So I've been examining and treating individuals in a variety types of violent contexts. So we have to be careful that bias doesn't get in our way when we're evaluating a particular situation in a particular case. That said, we do know that there still are differences. In a heterosexual couple, in a male-female dyad, the research still is clear that there are differences. Men still perpetrate more severe acts of violence. Women are still more likely to be injured. They are much more likely to suffer sexual violence at the hands of their partner. They're more likely to be intimidated, afraid, and they're much more likely to be killed. So we know that those differences exist, but we do examine, in those individual circumstances, knowing that either one could be a perpetrator or a victim.
So how are you able to determine whether a relationship is a situational violence or intimate partner violence?
So I thoroughly examine all of those other variables. I look for the coercive control, who holds the power in the situation.
If the stats are right, she is right. It makes sense. The problem is whenever you put in her perspective on that
if you don't follow
from earlier,
the decisions
that's
of
the
your
word.
partner.
That is my problem here.
Is there sexual violence? Is there intimidation and fear? Are there statistical factors that are
a slap? Yeah, these are fine.
severe and lethal domestic violence?
If the fight is unfair, yeah, you can punch up. You're chilling.
That we can use to assess.
Is it a heavyweight fight?
And really find out what's going on.
Does alcohol and substance use cause people to be violent?
No, it certainly doesn't cause people to be violent. We have plenty of people who can be, struggling with substance abuse and addiction, and they're not violent. But when you have a substance abuse and addiction and you perpetrate domestic violence, it does create a much more disastrous effect. It is a co-occurring variable, and we know that also from the research that the majority of the women will report that when their partner is drinking, the physical violence goes up. So a lot of the times when he's physically violent is when he's been consuming drugs or alcohol. When he's not consuming drugs and alcohol and he's not violent, those other behaviors continue to persist.
I mean,
the coercive control, the surveillance,
it's only he.
Excessive jealousy,
she's the expert. Only men drink alcohol and take drugs. Everybody knows this. It's a common stat.
Alcohol can just throw lighter fluid on a flame.
Only men
in
can
a
do that.
situation of domestic violence.
Real.
Is there research that looks at how women cope with the violence and abuse in their relationships?
Yes, there is.
Please tell me about it. What does it say?
So there's been a lot of research to talk about what do women do. That's the question that everyone wants to know. Why doesn't she just leave? And in asking that question, why doesn't she just leave, we actually are able to say, well, let me tell you what she does do. And what the research shows is women do a lot of things in that relationship. So there's sort of three main categories. One are the formal responses, the formal things that she does. Call the police, participate in prosecution of your partner, go see a therapist, go to a shelter, go to a hospital. These are sort of the very formal strategies that women can use. Then there are the informal strategies, and that's talking with your best friend, talking with your mom, talking with your friends, trying to get that emotional support from your social network. But the most common one is these personal strategies. And the personal strategies are really talking with your partner. They're trying to fix the relationship from within the confines of the relationship. You know, trying to get him to go to counseling, try to get him to go to church, try to get him to understand his ways, try to get him to get into AA or sober counseling or harm reduction model to help with his addiction, compliance with his demands, anticipating his demands, all these coping strategies that are sort of, you know, embedded within that intimate relationship.
Let's talk about the calling the police. Is that a common response?
It's not a common response. Many women do not want to call the police on their partners. You know, using criminal justice interventions in crimes of women and children are the least likely to be called into law enforcement. And most of the time when the police are called, it's because a particular incident has got out of hand and she feels unsafe. And the only way that she feels I can get this incident to end and stop is by calling law enforcement.
And if police are called, does the woman typically participate in the prosecution?
I mean, this has been a problem and a difficulty for prosecutors across the country since I've been doing this work. I'm actually frequently called by the prosecutor to testify about a fact pattern because the victim won't come in and testify. So dropping restraining orders, not participating in the prosecution is a very common dynamic in situations of intimate partner violence, domestic violence. And what we know, and what we know from our law enforcement data and colleagues, is that when you get that 911 call, they're very specifically trained to say, that's likely not the first episode. The chances are there have been more severe episodes before you get this call. So you can't go on the scene and think that this is the first episode of violence. And that's why a thorough assessment is supposed to be done when police officers arrive on the scene. So usually that episode that calls the police is just meant to stop that incident in that moment, to get a sense of safety. But most women don't want to participate and go forward with restraining orders.
Why do women in violent relationships stay in the relationship when the man's hurting them?
I mean, they stay for all the reasons we talked about in the cycle of violence. They stay for the loving man. They stay for the man who's kind. They stay for the man they decided to marry and had hope and promises for their future. So there's a lot of sort of love and attachment is why they're connected to their partner. Some people stay because they have economic reasons and they don't have tangible resources to leave. Some people have children in common and they don't want to deprive their children of a father. So some people fear retaliation. If I leave, I'm going to get
I feel like they are
seriously hurt.
sieging.
And frankly, the statistics bear it
a
out.
barrage
The
of
most dangerous
he
time
and her
for a woman is
so
when she's
much
leaving that
in
relationship.
neutral
Her
scenarios
likelihood of being killed
that the
grows
jury is
substantially
bathed
at that
in
moment. So
she's
leaving
getting rolled,
sometimes
she's a
isn't
victim,
the
or
best
whatever,
strategy.
and then
Staying
it's really hard to
so
recover.
safe. So there's usually a whole a multitude of factors of why a woman decides to stay in the relationship. And again, as I said previously, it doesn't mean she's unconcerned about the violence. It's just she hasn't figured out a way out yet.
What, if any, role does emotional attachment and love play in that?
That's, probably the biggest one, is that you have this, we talked about that.
She is
trauma
not
bond
her
that has
witness.
developed,
She's
that
a witness
psychological
being asked
attachment to your partner.
neutral questions.
You don't want to
that
leave
are
him. You've connected with him on
baseline.
so many other levels that giving that up just feels like a threat to your integrity. You're just and a threat to his, because you're just so intertwined. And
It is her witness, but you get what I
What, if
mean,
any,
though.
role does hope
You get
and
what I'm
optimism
saying.
play?
hope and optimism are really what keeps victims alive in these situations.
Guys, this is court.
That's what gets them going
You say the truth.
from one episode to the next, to get up the next day and maybe he's not going to drink today. Maybe it's going to be on his good side. Maybe he's going to come home and not disappear for 3 days. Continuing to hope that some type of change is coming down the pike.
Now, you mentioned lethality a little earlier. Can you please explain to us what that means?
So lethality is means death, means fatality, and we have very well validated instruments and data that looks at what factors happen in a relationship where a woman ends up dead. And we do that through looking retrospectively, saying, here's, this person ended up dead, killed by her partner in a homicide, and let's see what factors were there so that we can work at preventing it. It's very methodologically sound over different case control designs over multiple cities, used by the FBI and law enforcement. So these are a number of factors that tell us that somebody is in a very dangerous situation.
Thank you.
So some of the factors are an increase of frequency and severity of the violence, threats to kill, choking behavior, sexual assault, obsessive and possessive jealousy, controlling behavior, the perpetrator's use and abuse of substances, alcohol and substances, the perpetrator's threatening of suicide himself. Right, those are some of the top factors, and there are more that are very, very dangerous. When we hear that, and we hear a woman is in a situation where those are present, then we are moving out of situational couple violence.
What, if any, role does destroying property?
And destroying property, destruction of property, personal property is also one of the risk factors for danger and fatality.
And what, if any, role does leaving threatening messages play?
Yep. That's also a risk factor for lethality.
What are the psychological and traumatic effects that such interpersonal violence has on victims?
Objection compound.
Psychological and traumatic effects are kind of interchangeable.
I'll sustain the objection.
What are the psychological effects that such interpersonal violence has on victims?
So these have also been well researched, and they are wide and varied. We see depression and depressive disorders, sometimes with suicidality. We see anxiety and anxiety disorders, a lot of stress. We see post-traumatic stress disorder. We see substance abuse and substance abuse disorders. We see trust difficulties and difficulties in interpersonal relationships. As a result, we see a lot of shame and humiliation. We see anger and rage, a whole sleep disruption, a whole host of difficult psychological consequences having sustained a relationship of intimate partner violence.
What, if any, role does low self-esteem play?
Well, low self-esteem is a very common after effect, and that, when you're embedded in the relationship, it also makes it just very difficult for you to climb your way out.
What is emotional dysregulation?
Emotional dysregulation, so it's a DYS, dysregulation, is when you sort of don't feel that you have control of your emotions. You feel like you're fluctuating, from one to the next. It's not the same as a bipolar disorder. It, can happen in short moments that, it's really because your central nervous system is so out of haywire from being exposed to so many traumatic events that you may feel things deeply and with a short trigger in a very quick time.
In your experience, is there a particular way victims of intimate partner violence remember the violence they endured?
Well, memory for traumatic events is something that has been well researched. Sometimes people have what we call dissociative amnesia, where because of the physical or psychic pain,
why don't you go with this memory thing, like
a portion of the memory either gets blocked,
some event happened, like whatever
it's retrieved, whether it's stored or retrieval, we're not really sure. But most of the times, the memory is really about when you have multiple repeated events of the same type of thing. So if you are abused multiple times, and the abuse is very similar, it's very common for the victim to lose discrete details of a particular incident. They may not retain the memory for the complete incident, and that might not be to dissociative amnesia. That just might mean to forgetting because you have so many chronic events that have happened to you.
Are there common myths or misperceptions about domestic violence?
There are. I hope I've dispelled some of them here already, but I mean, the myths, certainly are that
Chat,
women
you understand
are
now what's going to be the strategy here, right?
passive, are,
Chat,
just
you understand,
sitting there
correct?
and letting the abuse happen, that women don't fight back, that women don't yell back, that some old ones that they like the
Setting up
violence,
the
they're not
jury
concerned
for
about
when
the violence,
whenever she cuts
that
his
if it
finger
was really
off,
bad, she
it was
really
too
would've
crazy.
left.
She
If
doesn't
it was really
remember.
bad,
It was
she really would've
traumatic,
told the police.
and she can't lie under
All of
oath.
those myths and misconceptions that just don't comport with the research.
Are there also myths about trauma survivors, how trauma survivors present?
Yes, there are. And what we say is, how lay people think someone who suffered a traumatic event is supposed to act. So in the immediate aftermath of a trauma, people think, oh, they should be hysterical and abreacting and emotional all over the place.
I don't know, she didn't.
And that's
She
typically
did
not
it.
the
I don't.
first reaction of a
Maybe she
trauma
didn't do it.
survivor. The first reaction
Thing is, though, as I'm telling you, with this strategy, you know for a fact that she will
emotional
not know
numbing,
she did or didn't.
emotional constriction. How do I get through this? Women
I
who
do
are
not
beaten,
recall.
they get up the next morning, they get their kids dressed, they get them to school, they go to work, they do a presentation in their office, they go on with life. The most normal thing that a person does who's experienced trauma is to get up and try to be normal. They're striving for that all the time. So sometimes if you see somebody who is more emotionally constricted, looks maybe stoic, looks like they're not feeling, it doesn't mean that they're not having internal reactions. We say this in the field of clinical psychology all the time. The inside doesn't match the outside. What you're seeing on the outside may not match what's going on for the person inside, because they have to be so controlled, because the fear is that if I let out a little of this emotion, I'm not going to be able to put the floodgates back on. It's just going to be too overwhelming. And that's true for people who are involved in litigation, and also true for my private patients who are, even though they're coming to me for help, they try very, very cleverly to not want to feel the difficult emotions of the trauma that they experienced.
And is it also possible that they can look very friendly and smile and laugh and things like that?
Yeah,
Can
absolutely.
compound.
Sustain.
What, if any, please describe some of the ways that a victim can hide that, as you just testified to.
We call that the appearance of normalcy, the appearance of competency, right? And it doesn't mean that they're not. It doesn't mean that they're not.
I knew this was coming. I knew this was coming.
It doesn't give you a bird's eye into their inner experience.
They're setting this up
And that's what
so
we do
obviously it's.
we say in the rooms of therapy, where we really help people deal with that they keep to themselves. But yes, someone can be smiling and happy. It doesn't mean that they're not suffering inside.
Is there a single
Guys, I said
profile
it because I called it last
that
time. I
fits
just said it
all
last time.
women in domestic violence
That's what happened.
situations?
No,
Is there a single profile of a man who perpetrates intimate partner violence?
no.
Your Honor, I'm at a point of moving to a new topic area. I don't know what Your Honor wants to do, because I know we switched the lunch route. I'm perfectly happy to keep going, but if this was a good stopping point, we could make that for the break.
All right, let's go ahead and take our afternoon break for 15 minutes, okay? Just do not discuss the case and do not do any outside research, okay? It's a little early.
Well, not even done with her resume. What the fuck, dude? I'm not gonna stand up. Is this how we're gonna run the fucking courtroom today? Fuck no. I'm staying. I'm staying. I can afford the contempt. Fuck you.
All right, and Dr. Hughes, since you are testifying, please do not discuss your testimony, including the attorneys at this point, okay?
Yes.
All right, we'll come back at 3:15 then, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Why do they even stand anyway? Why do they stand? Look, see, I'm standing. T-pose. Blood friend. You good now? You know what? I got back problems. Okay. I got a doctor's note in my backpack.
seated?
Okay.
Your next question?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Lady.
Dr. Hughes, did there come a time when you
I
conducted
got
a
doctor's
forensic
note.
psychological evaluation of Amber Heard? And please tell the jury what a forensic psychological evaluation is.
Could you turn it on at the bottom base?
Okay. A forensic psychological evaluation is an evaluation that is conducted for the courts to answer a particular legal question. It contains multiple
Lieutenant gets
parts.
spicy, trust me.
Ms. Heard is not a client of mine. She's never been in therapy with me. She's not under my clinical care. It is an objective evaluation to determine a particular legal question. Forensic evaluation follows a methodology that what we say it's a multi-method, multi-hypothesis driven methodology, which means I look at a variety of different documents and data using multiple hypotheses. It's not just one hypothesis, one theory of the case. You're going in looking to see, what possibly could be going on here. And then you use the data to arrive at that opinion. You look for consistency across the data to arrive at that opinion. And the forensic psychological evaluation has many parts. It has the clinical interview part, a structured or semi-structured clinical interview where I'm asking Ms. Heard lots of things about her life, both before Mr. Depp and after. It involves a psychological testing component of the evaluation, which allows me to do a good broad scan of different symptomatologies that people might have in their lives, as well as to have indicators of how she approached the test. Is she defensive? Is she malingering? Is she feigning? Is she exaggerating? It gives me indications about how she approached the evaluation. I review a number of documents, medical records, psychological records, the text, the audio, all the different things that we've had in this case, and then I conduct collateral interviews.
So, Dr. Hughes, just to be clear, do you assume everything the victim reports is true when you conduct these examinations?
No, of course not. I always approach a forensic evaluation with a healthy dose of skepticism. With any forensic evaluation, there exists a motivation that the individual may be telling you something that is not accurate. It doesn't mean that that's there, but you have to control for that and know that you're looking for, again, what does the data tell you, the external data, about what the person is also telling you.
Did the forensic evaluation follow a standard methodology, or was it specific to Ms. Heard?
No, this is my standard methodology that I would use with any individual who's in a forensic matter, and I would just call to evaluate them.
When did you meet with Amber Heard?
Okay. So I met with Ms. Heard for a total of about 29 hours. I met with her for the first time in September 2019. I saw her for 4 visits in live in my New York City office.
That was after.
That's about 21, 22 hours. And then I saw her twice over Zoom. One was in January 2021. And
New approach? Okay.
Wait, then that's after. Interesting. That's okay. I just thought that maybe we would have somebody who was either during relevance. Okay, I don't want to be weird. Okay, when was the article written? The articles and whatnot. What year was it in? Among Us a little bit later. Yeah, Among Us. Yeah, Among Us for sure. So the article was written in 2018. I don't know. I mean. Guys, I'm not trying to discredit. I'm just asking questions. I just feel like, so the cogs are already turning, things are already moving, and then you have an evaluation. Couldn't that mean that it's kind of like,
Dr.
I'm going to do this, inclined to a certain way, so it looks a certain way?
Were you consulting anything?
Dr. Hughes.
Dr. I'm so sorry. Dr. Hughes, were you consulting anything? Dr. Curry's here, I guess, as well. That's what confusion I saw right there.
I'm consulting my cheat sheet of the dates that I saw Ms. Heard so that I could accurately report to the court. I also have my final designation in front of me so that I could give the most accurate information to what I put in that report.
Okay. Okay, and do you want to see that? Okay, should we just take the break now and have him look at it, or does he want to?
Would you like to look at it now or before cross-examination?
It's just to post it.
Okay, before cross-examination.
Okay,
All right,
that's
that's
fine.
fine. Thank you.
Okay, please continue. I think you were telling
What
us
just
when
happened?
you saw Ms. Heard.
Sure. So there are 4 dates in person in New York City for a total of about 21 and a half hours. And then I saw her in January 18th, 2021, over Zoom for 3 hours, and then December 27th, 2021, for 4 hours over Zoom.
And what did the evaluation consist of?
So as I stated, the evaluation consisted of psychological testing, a semi-structured clinical
On
interview with
Zoom.
Ms. Heard, a review of a whole host of documents relative to this case and medical records and psychological records, and then 3 collateral interviews, 2 with her treating therapist, Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, Dr. Connell Cohen, and also with her mom.
And in the semi-structured clinical interview, what were you assessing?
Well, when someone comes in for the evaluation, you sometimes don't know what you're going to see or what you're going to get. So you absolutely have to do a full clinical interview and have a sense of their life patterns, things that have affected them in their lives, where they have worked, where they have lived, just get a full sense of their sort of being before the incident for which they're talking about. Then I do a full intimate partner violence assessment, looking at all those characteristics that I talked to you about earlier to get a sense of the full structure and the dynamic of this relationship. I also did looking at what were the effects, what were the psychological consequences of being in that relationship. And I also looked at the psychological consequences of some of the statements that were made by Mr. Depp through his attorney that are part of this, the counterclaim in this lawsuit.
At the end of that process, considering all the data, did you arrive at any expert opinions?
Yes, I did.
All right, I'd like to start with your
here it
main
comes.
expert opinions.
Here it comes,
and then go
boys.
through those. Can you please tell the jury what your main opinions were?
So like I said, there are opinions embedded within them, but the main opinion is that Ms. Heard's report of intimate partner violence and the records that I reviewed is consistent with what we know in the field about intimate partner violence, characterized by physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive control, and surveillance behaviors.
And what was the other main opinion that you had?
The second main opinion was that that Ms. Heard demonstrated very clear psychological and traumatic effects or the exacerbation of trauma from those statements that Mr. Depp made through his attorney. There were 3 statements that we evaluated to see how they affected her emotionally and psychologically, and it was my determination that they did.
Wow.
And did you arrive at any diagnostic conclusions?
Yes, I did.
And what were those?
I diagnosed Ms. Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder.
And what, if any, etiology was associated with the post-traumatic stress disorder?
So the etiology is the cause. In order to meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to have an actual cause. It's one of the few diagnostic entities that we have to have a cause for. And the cause was the intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp. That was what was pushing the symptoms. That was what related to the intrusive phenomena. That was related to her avoidance. That was related to her differences in her mood. That was related to her avoidance efforts. So it was the cause was the intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp.
Okay. Now, let's first go back to the forensic evaluation. You mentioned you reviewed documents. What documents did you review?
So I'm going to refer to my list of documents so that I can be clear for you all. It is a 4-page.
All right. If you want to approach.
4-page post-it and a 4-hour Zoom call. Let's get it. No, Chad. They said from this case and the decisions that were made, right? Is that what they said? Whatever. So whatever she says is that things were in line with her diagnosis or whatever. So she says that the court document proved all the things that she already had in mind, such as all types of violence and the harassment or whatever, all of it. Okay. I don't know. Is that what she said? That's what she said, right? Or am I completely lost here? She said her diagnosis and what she was told corresponds to all the traits of fucking relationship violence, whatever the fuck. Yeah. PTSD from shit. Okay, stop. Fuck, man. Why am I reading the chat, man? Yeah, I gotta do. Fuck, man. Christ. I mean, just imagine you didn't see it, and you wake up, and there's just like a nice like log. You're just like logged up, dude. Shit, man. You know what could possibly give me PTSD? Seeing my finger in a paper wrapper and my butler putting in a bucket of ice and bringing it to the hospital for it to be reattached. That would probably give me a couple of nightmares for sure, though. Chat, can they get all the nerves, all of them back, and you get 100% of your feeling in your finger if it flies off? Oh, you lose some. I would fucking hate that. I'd lose my shit if I ever had that.
Dr.
Oh my
Curry,
God.
if you, I mean, Dr.
Dr.
Hughes,
Hughes.
I don't know why I keep
Oy.
doing that. My apologies. Dr. Hughes.
Damn.
I think it's the confusion of having her in the courtroom. Dr. Hughes,
Again.
if you need to consult your notes to answer something, let us know that you need to consult your notes. Otherwise, try to answer to the best of your ability. And then if you need
she's
to do that, just
mauled.
let us know you're consulting your notes, okay? The concern is that you not read from them, that
Yeah,
you
Dr.
consult
Curry
them
didn't
as
need
you
that
need
last
to.
time. I'm just going to
Okay.
say it ahead of time.
Correct. I just don't want this to be a memory test of having conducted many documents, 80 pages of notes,
But you
and 12
can-
psychological testings to,
You can reference your notes, just don't read from them, okay?
yeah, no problem.
Okay, great. So please tell us what documents you reviewed.
don't read from
Please
them?
tell the jury.
Okay, so I reviewed a number of documents, a plethora of documents, most, and I obviously won't read them all, but I reviewed certainly all of Ms. Hurd's testimony that she gave in her deposition testimony in this case, her deposition or her trial testimony
No
in the
quotes, got
UK
it.
case. I did the same thing for Mr. Depp. I reviewed his deposition testimony as well as his trial testimony in the UK as well. I reviewed a number of the depositions that were put forth in this case. I reviewed the psychological treatment notes for Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, Dr. Connell Cohen, Dr. Laurel Anderson, and Dr. Amy Banks, although she did not have treatment records. So I reviewed not only their records, did collateral interviews with some of them, and also read their deposition testimony, and also read other medical records in this case, nursing notes in this case, in the highlights. And I also listened to the audios that were put forth in this case and read the text messages and emails.
And what, if anything, did you do with respect to any videos?
And I also saw the video in the kitchen. Yes.
Okay.
Oh my,
Now-
not the kitchen video.
The collateral interviews that you conducted, why did you conduct those?
Well, collateral interviews is a standard part of a forensic evaluation. It's an opportunity to hear from
The
another
cupboards.
treating clinician, the person who's actually treating the individual you're evaluating, and get a better sense from that person
Oh my God,
of
the cupboards.
what they saw, what they knew, how they experienced this person. Sometimes our clinical notes
The
don't give the
cabinets.
full breadth of what really was going on in that therapy, because the notes are meant to be sort of short and to the point of what happened, who was there, and what was the plan. So it was really helpful to talk to these two clinicians who really were with Ms. Heard throughout the duration of her relationship with Mr. Depp. So they give us sort of a contemporaneous look at what was going on for her emotionally, and then what was she reporting, what was she saying about the relationship to her therapist.
And you mentioned the name Dr. Bonnie Jacobs. Please tell the jury who Dr. Bonnie Jacobs is.
So Dr. Bonnie Jacobs was Ms. Heard's therapist, and may I refresh my recollection with my notes, Your Honor?
She's allowed to
For the
consult the
dates,
notes.
if you'd like me to tell the dates.
Oh, just the dates, surely.
You're right, Your Honor. Yes.
May I?
Yes, you may consult your notes, yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Can we be heard?
Is he gonna ask to like redact and shit or what? I don't think that's how it works, is it? She has the files? I mean, only the dates? That's it? Yeah, I don't know about that. Hey! Madam? I wonder how many times Miss Curry had to go through her notes and ask for pauses and ask to go back in her binder. I don't remember how many times sometimes you have to refresh my memory on this one. Oh, that was a 0? Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
It's Hughes. Yeah, she's Hughes. But the other
So
one's
she
Curry.
treated with Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, who is a psychologist, from October 2011 through August 2014. She actually was seeing Dr. Jacobs somewhat earlier, before she got in the relationship with Mr. Depp.
She's reading.
And then she transferred care to Dr. Connell Cohen, who was referred by Dr. Kipper, who was the treating physician for Mr. Depp, and then later for Miss Heard. And she treated with Dr. Cohen from after she left Dr. Bonnie Jacobs in September 2014 to June 7th, 2016.
Okay, thank you. And so and I guess you got ahead of me there, so you also talked to Dr. Connell Cohen, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you also spoke with Paige Heard, did you say?
That's correct.
And who is Paige Heard?
Paige Heard is Amber Heard's mother.
Stop linking to the mic,
And
please.
when did you speak with Paige Heard?
I spoke with all of these individuals at the end of 2019. Again, I can check my notes and let you know the exact date if you'd like.
I think the end of 19.
Yeah, they all were
2019
in
is
the
fine.
end of 19, yes.
All right. And are you aware that Paige Heard has since died? She died 2 years ago?
Yes, I am aware, sadly.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the psychological testing. You stated that you conducted psychological testing, is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you
Overruled all of it.
Can you please tell the jury how many psychological assessments you administered to Amber Heard?
I administered 12.
Can you please tell the jury which ones you administered?
So I am going
Stop
to refer
leaning
to my
to the
designation
mic.
that has the list so that I don't forget anything.
Okay.
Oh, please. All this in, was it? Oh,
So I administered,
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
She can refresh her recollection.
As long as she's not reading it.
Right. You just can't read. You're not supposed to read from it, but you can refresh your recollection as you're speaking.
so I can look and just look up, and that's refreshing my recollection? Okay.
All right, if we could approach for a moment.
Haha. Guys, it's so funny, guys. Guys, this court has rules. Haha, that's so funny, dude. Dude, that's so funny. Ha, dude. See, what the fuck is this? What the fuck is happening? Oh, I'm not allowed to do this right now as I'm reading, and I'm still doing it more. Oh, I can't do this? Really? Come on, man. Christ. Oh my, okay, dude. See? Cameraman? Really, dude? Really, dude? Cameraman?
Dr. Hughes, can you tell
Guys,
us the tests?
this
that
is
you
some
administered?
storytelling.
Yes, I can. I administered the Personality Assessment Inventory, which is a broadband instrument to scan for psychopathology and psychological symptoms that people have. I administered the Trauma Symptom Inventory, too, which is an instrument to scan for common traumatic effects that people have. I administered the Miller Forensic Assessment of Symptoms Test, which is a measure of malingering. I administered the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Checklist for the 5th edition for the DSM-5. I administered the Clinician-Administered PTSD Scale for DSM-5.
I need two things.
I administered the Beck Depression Inventory,
I need a
the Beck
muffin
Anxiety Inventory,
and a
the
diagnosis.
Mood Disorders Questionnaire, the Danger, I did 3 intimate partner violence measures, the Conflict Tactics Scale, the Abusive Behavior Observation Checklist, and the Danger Assessment Scale. And then I also did the Life Events Checklist, which scans and gets us to ask about a lot of traumatic events that an individual may have experienced, and we administer that typically before either doing the PCL or doing the CAPS.
Cameraman?
Thank you. Were there any tests you administered to Amber Heard that were designed to reveal malingering or feigning?
Yes, there were.
Okay, can you please tell the jury about those?
So malingering is the false production of psychological symptomatology for the purpose of some external material gain. Feigning is the false production of psychological symptomatology with no identification of what that gain may be. So basically feigning is saying your mental health is worse than it actually is. So I administered 3 of the tests, had validity indices built in that could allow us to address that question. The MFAS, the Miller Assessment, a Forensic Assessment of Symptoms Test, is a specific malingering instrument. It looks at malingering psychopathology. Is this someone, malingering psychopathology? She scored a 0 on that scale. So on that test, sorry, not the scale, that test. So on that test, there was no evidence of malingering. On the TSI, there are 2 validity indices, and she scored within the normal range on those scores as well. One was slightly elevated, but when in testing the limits, because it has rare symptoms and over-endorse symptoms, I determined that also was a valid measure. And then finally, the PAI, the large scale 344 question instrument, has very robust validity scales on it to test for exaggeration or feigning or malingering, and she did not score in any of those scores and those scales at all. Those were not elevated. So the combined results between those 3 tests suggest to me that Ms. Heard is not malingering her psychological symptomatology.
Now, Dr. Curry testified that one test showed, quote, intentional exaggeration in the 98th percentile, meaning that she engaged in extreme levels of exaggeration, end of quote. Do you agree with that?
I do not.
Why?
Because that test, the scale that she is referring to it's called ATR. It's the Atypical Response Scale. As I said, that combines rare symptoms and over-endorsed symptoms. It's very frequently elevated in people who have high levels of distress. And then importantly, on this test specifically, it says, do not use the percentile rank. It is in the manual, it is in italices, because the way that this test was normed, it was normed on people who have trauma. So it's what we call negatively skewed. That means it falls on the tail end of the continuum.
They make a scale
it is
and not to use
a
it then.
normal curve where we would normally think of how a percentile would work. So you would not use the percentile rank on this test.
You want to approach?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Interesting. So why is there a scale and why is there a test then? I don't get it. Guys, this is the smartest Curie skeptic. Curie deniers?
Dr. Hughes, please continue.
So that is a very inaccurate way to describe that scale and that test. And so the ATR scale on this test is probably the least robust of our validity scales, so you would never make a comment like that based on one scale if you don't have consistency across data. And when you look at the consistency across the testing with the PAI, the TSI, and the MFAS, and there's research to support that when they go together, you have a higher degree of likelihood that this is not feigned PTSD, that this is not feigned symptomatology. And then actually, if I look at the validity scores on the MMPI-2 that Dr. Curry administered, those scales are not elevated for exaggeration or malingering either. So if I add that, now I have really robust data that Ms. Hurd is not malingering or feigning her psychological symptomatology.
Thank you. Did you administer any tests that are specific to domestic violence?
Yes, I did.
Which ones?
So that was the conflict tactics scale, the abusive behavior observation checklist, and the danger assessment scale.
And what did they show?
I would like to refer to the testing.
To refresh
To
your
refresh
recollection?
my recollection, just a glance so
Yes,
I
you
can
may
be
do that.
clear with the jury.
Guys, she spams the stats of whatever the fuck of everything to back it
So
up.
what
Whatever.
the overall gist of the testing was that, and the benefit of these tests is that they allow me to ask for what Mr. Depp did to Ms. Hurd and then also what Ms. Hurd did to Mr. Depp. So it was asking about both sets of behavior. And what
Objection, Your Honor.
Still reading.
We're back to reading.
She wasn't even looking down. She was looking at the jury.
No, she's reading.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Please continue.
She's still reading.
What
It's
these
just
tests
this
show
is
was
just
that
fucking
there was
stupid.
a high degree of serious violence perpetrated by Mr. Depp toward Ms. Hurd. There was violence
she's
more on
literally
a mild
reading.
level perpetrated by Ms. Hurd toward Mr. Depp, with one severe indicator, which was the punching that she indicated to me. There were scales about negotiation,
She's literally reading.
about how much this couple tries to figure out their problems. They both scored, again, this is Ms. Hurd reporting that, but they both scored in the high
Again.
range where they're both saying that, yes, we're trying to figure this out, we're trying to work out this relationship. There were scores on the psychological aggression scale where Mr. Depp
Even the glasses,
engaged in
she's
more
going to the
severe acts
pages.
of psychological aggression, whereas Ms. Hurd did engage in also some mild and severe acts of psychological aggression. The amount of injury that was reported
This is
was
so
significantly
shameless.
higher and more severe by Ms. Hurd, what she was subjected to, and then she was
Well, can't
subjected
you read
to
it? She's
sexual violence
supposed to.
where, Mr.
I would
Depp,
assume things that are
based on her
difficult, like
report, was
dates,
subjected to
she
no.
can refresh and recall her memory.
And then the other, on the
But she
danger
can't read
assessment scale,
straight off the fucking thing.
that there
She just
were
can't.
a number of factors that were related to severity in violent relationships and a risk factor. When we look, as I said earlier, when behaviors come up on this scale, they're very worrisome, very scary, and we
She
have
can?
to take
They
them
literally said she
seriously.
can't.
So
They-
there were a number of behaviors that came up on this scale, such as Mr. Depp threatens to kill her, the increase in severity of the abuse, the forced sexual activity, the choking behavior.
Because she's
his
testifying
excessive
it.
jealousy.
Objection, Foundation.
Talking about the test results.
Overruled, go ahead.
Please continue.
The obsessive jealousy, the control aspect, and his threatening of suicide to kill himself. So those were risk factors that placed her in the increased danger range. And this is a range that, says that we certainly have to advise women of their risk and consult with law enforcement if they're involved, or judges if they're involved, because this means that a woman is at risk for more serious or lethal domestic violence.
So did the results of the psychological tests you administered to Amber Heard support a diagnosis of PTSD?
Objection, Leading.
What, if any, psychological tests did you administer that supported a diagnosis of PTSD for Amber Heard? Sure.
So there were 4 tests that supported that diagnosis. One was the PAI, which was that 344 question large scale personality inventory. On that test, her largest subscale, her highest subscale was the one that measures traumatic stress. So that was clinically significant. On the TSI, 2 of her scales were the intrusive experiences dimension and the defensive avoidance dimension, 2 of the classic scales of trauma and PTSD. On the PCL, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder checklist 5, that she scored in all 4 domains of PTSD, and that's an instrument that says how much are you bothered by these symptoms.
Zoom call.
And in all 4 clusters,
Holy shit, we're back in high school.
The intrusive experiencing, when things about the abuse or the trauma enter your mind when you did not want them to. Sometimes they're cued, sometimes they're uncued. She answered in the avoidance category, which is a second category of PTSD.
I'm just kidding. Settle down.
That I do things to try not to think about this, to try not to feel this, to try not to get upset. Sometimes I avoid certain people because they become a trigger for me. She scored in what we call the negative alterations in cognition and mood, changes in her thoughts and feelings as a result of the abuse and trauma, and also in the physiological hyperactivity, the hyperarousal, the hypervigilance, the startle response. So on the PCL, she endorsed symptoms in all 4 of those categories, saying, some of these symptoms are bothering me a lot. And then finally, the clinician-administered PTSD scale for the DSM-5. And what that allows me to do, unlike the PCL, is really look at symptom severity.
My trigger is the shit on the bed.
How is this really playing out for this individual? And similarly, she scored in all 4 categories of trauma and of having intrusive experiences and nightmares and avoidance efforts and physiological hyperactivity and changes in her mood and her thoughts. And her total score was a 28, which falls in the moderate range. So that means that she has experiencing a moderate degree of post-traumatic stress disorder symptomatology. And those tests allow me to make that definitive diagnosis that she suffers from PTSD.
Thank you. What, if any, consideration did you give to Amber Heard's history of childhood abuse in making your diagnosis?
I mean, that was a significant consideration, given that we know that childhood, well, first of all, we know that people can experience multiple traumas across the lifespan. And we wanted to make sure that the symptoms that she was experiencing were related to what she experienced with Mr. Depp and not her childhood. And certainly, earlier on in the evaluation and when I evaluated and spoke with her, that was true. And that was also true on the latest measure, the clinician-administered PTSD scale for DSM-5, the CAPS-5. And that's because the content, you have to look at what is the content of the symptom. So it's not that someone says, oh yeah, something traumatic comes into my mind. No, what is it? What comes into your mind? What bothers you? What are the triggers? And those were all specific to Ms. Heard's relationship with Mr. Depp. The reason the childhood is also significant is that we know that if somebody suffers childhood abuse as a child, they are much more likely to have an adult re-victimization. And they're much more likely then to be more vulnerable to obtaining a PTSD, to getting PTSD, if they've had that prior vulnerability. So it's a very strong vulnerability characteristic to obtaining PTSD when you have a subsequent trauma. The other aspect about her childhood abuse is that she was raised in a family of violence. She was physically abused by her father. She saw her father abuse her mother. Her father was very explosive and had violent outbursts. And both her parents also struggled with substance abuse very significantly. So she had learned from a very early age how to caretake, how to live in a situation that is mired in chaos. How do I take care of a parent who's passed out, knotted out from heroin? And how do I get up and get my sister to school? She learned at a very early age that she had to figure out how to do this in this scenario. And I would say lastly, what that environment taught her was that she learned that she could love someone who hurts her. She knew that people who hurt her also can love her. And she learned how to have this tolerance for cognitive inconsistency, this tolerance for two should be diametrically opposed emotions. But she grew up knowing or believing perhaps that this could happen. And she also believed that she could fix him, just like she tried to fix her father and just like she tried to fix her mother. She truly, truly believed that she could fix Mr. Depp and rid him of his substance abuse problems. But that did not work.
Wait, so where did PTSD come from then? From her parents or from him?
Yes, I did.
And what, if any, agreement did you have with Dr. Curry's interpretation of the CAPS-5?
I didn't agree with her interpretation, having been a trauma psychologist for over 25 years and administered hundreds of these.
Both.
I found that there were flaws in how she chose to administer it, and then some of the coding. Misheard on that CAPS-5 to Dr. Curry certainly reported trauma-based symptomatology related to the abuse by Mr. Depp, but somehow that was not coded as such.
And did you review Dr. Curry's MMPI, too, that she administered on Amber Heard?
Yes, I did.
And do you agree with her interpretations on that test?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Because this profile is a normal profile. There are no clinical scores elevated above 65, which is 1.5 standard deviations of the mean, which is what we use to determine clinical significance. And if none of those scales are elevated, it becomes very difficult for us to make assumptions about a person's psychology and their functioning. Now remember, the psychological testing generates
it's another scale that doesn't matter.
A person that we then, using our clinical judgment, have to make a decision about. We have to make an assessment about it. And if none of those scales are elevated, it just doesn't give us rich information to make those determinations. The one scale which is accurate that was elevated was one that measures defensive responding, sort of a protective responding, an unwillingness to admit minor faults. That was elevated, and that was true. But the result of that is you have a defensive profile. You have somebody who's
cross-exam is going to be a fucking cookery.
So the scales are all low. So there's no way you can take that MMPI and then say it meets it's consistent with borderline personality disorder. You just don't have the symptom expression on it in order to do that.
And that's my next question here. What, if any, diagnoses did you make of personality disorders for Amber Heard based on your testing?
I did not make a personality disorder of Ms. Heard.
Why not?
For a number of reasons.
Yeah, why not?
Number one, a personality disorder requires a pervasive pattern in a variety of contexts. Two key words: pervasive pattern, variety of contexts. That means if her emotional instability, her affect dysregulation, or her fear of abandonment is only occurring in the relationship with Mr. Depp, and we don't have evidence of it before, and we don't have evidence of it after, it is not.
What? Is that, guys, she's an expert, so it's whatever. Interesting. Well, I'm trying to be open-minded. I just wish if there was, let's say, a report, or she knew of the conversation or the diagnosis she had before with her therapist, or whatever, then she could bring that forward, right? She couldn't say, oh, okay, well, I was made aware that she was like this before, right? Before she was, so therefore that. But in this scenario, I feel like we only have the middle, or at least the way it's presented to us is that she only has the middle, and she's saying that the before and after is irrelevant because it was only in that period of time or whatever, right? Is that what she's saying? Is that it's that period of time because it's in a relationship, and that's why it matters. It's only in that and because of that it's that way. That's what she meant. Or means. So her overall personality thing isn't relevant before. She's reading Randy. When it's time to rant about needless garbage that not a single living soul asked for, motherfucker, she goes on a fucking Bible script, longer, dude, than any fucking text out there. But whenever it's time for a simple test result or convo, one convo from a 23-hour Zoom fucking call. Dude, let me check. Glasses on for fucking Zoom. Like, holy fuck, man. Christ, dude. Get this shit on the road, pal. Sucker. You know, yes, I wasn't biased before. Nah, I'm super biased. I don't give a shit. Okay. If as a bystander, as a viewer, I'm trying to be neutral, okay? And she acts like this on the stand as the forensic psychologist, the way that she's biased, then fuck it. I'm incredibly biased then. I'm gonna be far out at balls to the walls. What can I tell you, dude? Christ. Man. Okay, they said that she accounted for it by saying she did not behave like this before and after. Completely counter to what Psych said. Interesting. Reading Randall. More reading. Read that shit, poggers. Read it, lol W. Amber hit her ex-wife? What, is that true? Was she had a wife before this? Interesting. They divorced because of abuse. Wait a minute. Wait, but then she says that her before didn't matter because it only appeared in that relationship with Depp, but it appeared before. Couldn't you say that if it reoccurs and it's a pattern, if it happened before, it happened again, type of thing? I mean, like I said, cross-exam is gonna be an absolute gladiator fight. Can I shut up? I mean, what else am I gonna do, man? It's they're. Guys, can we get some lip readers on the line? Guys, come on. Come on, let's go. Chop it up. Yeah, I get it. I said no. Okay. Nodding. She says okay. Got it. Can we get some unmute the mics per se, perhaps? Guys, they all have balls of water with a bunch of stuff in it. Chat, what is that? They have red, they have yellow, they have like deep orange. They got some juice up in here, man. Flavoring, you think? It's mayo? Oh no, if you're gonna give me to testify something like that, I'm on the fucking I'm on the G Fuel Discount XQC. And on top of that, if I have to listen to that lady talk for more than an hour, yeah, I need my the whole shaker cup, dude. Are you kidding me, dude? Jack me the fuck up, dude. 700 milligrams of fucking caffeine is straight into my brain. Are you kidding me? Dude, I'm not gonna fuck. Dude. Guys, this is supposed to be the only thing that can fix my sleep. When she fucking starts talking. Holy. Kim. Could Depp Giga Chad. Wrong. What is this, chat? 402.50. 402.50. What does that mean? It's a time. 403.07. What could that even mean? 403. 403 dot 15. 16. Of 4 hours. 4 hours. Oh, it's 4 p.m. 3 minutes in Eastern time zone. Oh, okay. Damn, this is getting heated. Look at her. We're gonna have a whole mini court case, guys. This is like a side quest. She's playing a 1v1 overtime. Let's see it. She's smiling. Everybody's smiling. They had a good time. We didn't. Unmute. We're champ. Please don't.
Dr.
Please
Hughes,
don't.
What, if anything, did Dr. Cowan say to you about any type of diagnoses of personality disorders?
Dr. Cohen did not diagnose Ms. Heard with any personality disorder.
And what, if anything, did Dr. Bonnie Jacobs say about diagnosing Amber Heard with any personality disorders?
And Dr. Jacobs similarly did not diagnose Ms. Heard with any personality disorder.
Thank you. Now, let's turn back to intimate partner violence. What types of physical violence were reported to you?
So there were a number of physically violent behaviors that were reported, that Ms. Heard reported that Mr. Depp perpetrated. He pushed her, he shoved her, he slapped her with the front of his hand and the back of his hand. He choked her, he slammed her into the wall, he pushed her and she fell down. He kicked her in the back. Again, without looking at my notes, that's what I can recall.
Okay. And what type of injuries did Amber Heard report to you?
She reported mostly bruising, pain, some cuts. She reported vaginal pain from some of the sexual assaults. She reported that she did have some scratches and cuts on her from broken glass. She reported that she believed she may have lost consciousness 2 times, once in the Australia incident and once in the December 15th, 2015 incident.
What type of coercive control was reported or did you find?
Leading.
Guys, She recorded every interaction,
What, if
every
any,
couple they had for the longest time.
Coercive control.
Every problem.
Was reported.
She recorded him fucking brushing his
So the
teeth
course of
and coming home from
control
work,
that,
but she didn't
was
take pictures of her
determined in this
injuries.
relationship I found to be quite significant. There were many instances where Mr. Depp tried to control how Miss Heard went about her career. He didn't want her to show nudity. He didn't want her to show boob. He didn't want her to act with certain actors because of this obsessive jealousy. He criticized her ambition. He'd rather she not work. He called, the ambition as something as a negative thing. It made her very fearful to have to look at scripts or talk about movie roles because he persistently put those down and told her she didn't need to work and she didn't need to do that and she didn't need to show her tits and ass. He didn't necessarily support her work. The way this manifested as well is that he called almost every actor that she had to work with. Males and females.
Wait,
So
this goes
no matter
against what they were saying
show she was
previously.
filming or shooting, he would call the leading actor. He would call the director. He would tell you, I got eyes down there. I got eyes down on the set. So she never felt safe to be herself and be an actress in these films or
The
productions.
tits and ass
because
thing,
she
that goes-
had
that
to
goes
come
the-
home and
that go-
then endure his anger at her for doing something or for not doing
That's a
something.
conflicting story.
When she was filming and he was in the same town, she feared that he would show up on the set and, to know what her call sheet, what she was filming that day. She, even told her assistant, don't give it to him, don't let him see it so that he won't show up. And sometimes he did. So it was very trepidatious for her and very anxiety-provoking that he continued to do this.
Wow.
He
Guys,
tried to control what she wore.
Cross-exam.
When she was going out with him, things were fine, but he told her often, no woman like mine is going to dress like a whore, and didn't want her to wear revealing clothing, or revealing clothing according to him. She recalled an incident when she was going on a job audition, and he said, you're going to go out with those tits and ass? And she had to sort of go in and put on what she said, mom jeans, so that she didn't look sexy, so she didn't look revealing, and continue to try to plead with him about what jobs she could take and she could not take. This made her be very sort of restrictive and try to conceal things. She would hide her scripts. Because she
Impressive.
couldn't read them in front of him because he would put them down or want to see
All of these
where there might be
anecdotal,
nudity, where there might be something where
verbal
she's doing
things,
a love
yet
scene.
none of them are in recording, and that's
then
not how he spoke in the
almost
recordings
every
either.
person that she was in a film with, there would be those barrages of the consistent accusations of infidelity. And we saw that on the
Even when
Australia
drunk.
pictures, the Billy Bob. He was one person that he continued, to berate her about having an affair with. That's what obsessive control looks like, those messages on the mirror. When you look at how he wanted her to there was some interference with the family, with her sister. When some things were leaked, he was obsessed, believing that it was Whitney who did it, and eventually Miss Heard had to succumb and say, okay, yes, it was, and then alienate herself from her sister because she just couldn't take the fights anymore. She just couldn't take the constant barrage of criticism. So there were many instances when, in terms of their interactions, she would have to text him right back, but when she would text him, he could not answer for days. And it's this sort of, when we talk about, the ghosting, but your husband doesn't ghost you, your partner doesn't ghost you. And there were so many times of this sort of withdrawal of affection, which was on his terms and when he wanted to do it. I'm aware that there is, testimony in this case that, Mr. Depp decided to leave because he didn't want to be violent. And I do think that's true sometimes. I think he did leave in times where he didn't want an altercation. He did leave after an altercation. He did leave and then came back and continued the altercation. So leaving wasn't the defining variable. The problem was that, with this obsessiveness and this perseveration that he had, the fight would always come back. So leaving might end the argument for that moment, but Miss Heard knew he was always going to come back, and
What?
he was going to, start the interrogation once again.
That's so backwards. That's not how that works at
What
all.
is the effect of the coercive control on Amber Heard?
I came back
the effect
first
was
because I knew
drastic.
he would
She
come back.
Talked to me that she, her roles consistently
What
dropped.
is-
over the time that she was in the relationship with Mr. Depp, just because it was so difficult to go on auditions, to want to be in a different location with him. Whenever she was not on location with him, it was very stressful. It was very anxiety-provoking because of the accusations of infidelity.
Guys,
we heard that.
I punched him in the fucking face because I knew that he was going to punch me in an hour.
Babe, there's no one here. There's no one here. That was something that she had to do repeatedly and constantly over the course of the relationship. So it caused a significant amount of anxiety, of distress,
same logic,
of
literally.
having to try to conceal and maneuver around him to try to have the career that she wanted to have. It made her hypervigilant, and definitely contributed to sort of her psychological symptomatology getting worse over time.
What about sexual violence?
So there was a number of incidents of sexual violence reported in this relationship. Those are documented early on in Dr. Bonnie Jacobs' notes, where when Mr. Depp was drunk or high, he threw her on the bed, ripped off her nightgown, and tried to have sex with her. There were times when he forced her to give him oral sex when he was angry. These weren't in loving moments. These were
Is there
angry
even the
moments,
modern woman approve? Is there
moments of
ripped
dominance,
clothes,
moments of
pictures,
him
maybe
trying
anything
to
at
get
all?
control over her. There was a time when they were in Hicksville in the trailer. I don't want to say trailer park.
Yes,
but
I'm
it's a
asking. I'm
trailer
not
park.
even saying no.
It is a trailer park.
I'm literally asking
where
it. Is
he
there in evidence? Was there
accusing
anything?
her of a woman hitting on Amber, and that was the problem. Amber got accused of women hitting on her, and it got accused of men hitting on her. So there were so many targets that came through in his obsessive jealousy. But when he, on that incident when Kelly Sue was accused of hitting on Miss Heard, and they went back into the trailer, Mr. Depp performed a cavity search and ostensibly was looking for drugs and felt it acceptable to rip off her nightgown and stick his fingers up her vagina to look for cocaine, thought that maybe she was hiding them there. And again, these incidents often happened in a drug-fueled rage. There was another incident in the Bahamas where when he got angry, he took his fingers and he put them in her vagina and moved her around violently in the closet. Again, an act of sexual violence. And of course, the incident in Australia was one of the most severe instances of sexual violence that Miss Heard had to endure, in which when he was beating her and choking her and telling her, I'm going to fucking kill you, I hate you, I'm going to fucking kill you, and he grabbed a bottle that was on the bar and penetrated her with that bottle. And Miss Heard reported to me of dissociating and going outside of her body, and the only thing she was thinking is, oh God, I hope it's not the broken one.
That you cut a cigarette with?
What, if any, psychological abuse did you find?
There was a number of psychologically abusive behaviors. As I stated, Miss Heard admitted to me and reported that she engaged in those behaviors as well. She reported that she did call him names and offensive comments and said things to him that were horrible, and that she was incredibly saddened and horrified by her behavior. And looking back, she, at this point, not being in the constant barrage of
true, we don't know.
abuse, does not recognize her. The abuse.
I know it's
by
the
Mr.
process.
Depp,
If the evidence
he
comes
called her
later
a number
on,
of names,
during
frequently
their
whore,
just their
slut, cunt, lesbian camp counselor, easy ambition. Ambition was a weaponized term in that relationship. So he called her a lot of names and
Guys,
humiliated her. And
all
talked
stories and
talked
evidence of
about
all
the
this will come
intimidation
later,
tactics
right?
that,
When it's their turn
Mr. Depp
in a
was
couple
often
days, right?
banging and throwing and hitting things in the household, which sort of got the tension to rise up very significantly, very quickly.
Can you tell me how you conducted
I'm asking.
your
I'm not making
analysis to arrive
conclusions.
at these conclusions?
Sure. So what I did was look at the incidents that were reported and look at the corroborating data around it. So as we stated, most of these incidents of intimate partner violence happen behind closed doors. Not everyone is going to witness what the parties are reporting behind closed doors. So you look at what is the data that surrounds it. Is there any data before it? Is there any data after it? Is the victim telling somebody in real time about what's happening? Are there therapy notes?
I
Are there
just hope
pictures? Are there text messages?
there's some sort of proof
allow us
behind
to
most,
fill
if
in the
not all
pieces
of
the
these.
picture, even
That's
though
all.
we don't have
Or
exactly
a
what
good amount.
happened at that moment.
We'll see.
The more collateral that we have and the consistency across those data points, it gives us greater confidence in our results.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. So
Vague.
Overruled, I'll allow.
So, for example,
Why?
the Boston plane
Why? I hope
incident, I
because-
believe, without looking, I know May 24th, 2014. This is the incident where
For everybody's sake, you want the truth to be out.
Ms. Heard and Mr.
That's
Depp
fair
were going
enough.
to fly back to LA and spend the weekend
What do you want?
together.
The
They were
truth, then.
shooting at different sites. Ms. Heard is on the plane waiting for Mr. Depp to come on in the tarmac. He's reportedly sitting in the SUV, smoking and drinking, smoking weed and drinking. She is filming with James Franco at this point, and she gets on the plane and he starts talking about James Franco, making a lot of derogatory comments about her, and I hope you had fun with your escapades, and some more inflammatory language. And then in an argument, when she got up to leave, he kicked her in the back, and she went forward on the plane. To the front of the plane, because he sat in the back of the plane. So if I look at what is the corresponding data to this, there's a therapy note, several notes in Bonnie Jacobs' records.
Guys,
that
proof
talk
will
about
come when they testify
Depp's
about them
increasing
being
use
in
of
the
alcohol
events or her
and
being
his
in the
obsessive
events.
jealousy around James
They'll
Franco.
support the testimony
Before this
with the
Boston
evidence and the
plane.
pictures.
After the incident,
For her,
Ms.
it's what
Heard
she
told
said,
her friend Io.
and she made the
She told her
reports
friend
and the
Savannah. She told her friend
diagnoses
Rocky.
and the reports.
Ms. Heard
That's
did
what
not
she was
go
given.
home. She was
So it's-
afraid
This
to
is
go
all
home. So
fair.
she went to a hotel because when Johnny was in these states, he would often show up because he's still in that drinking and drugging phase. And he talked about that. That was the roxycodone before he detoxed. He was still in that, high substance abuse phase that he would often show up at night, and that did not feel safe. There was a text from Stephen Juters, Mr. Depp's assistant.
All right, you want to approach?
Lawyers look confident. They look like, I don't know. Lawyers look confident, though. Guys, these are some pretty crazy words. He's laughing and smiling, so I don't know. Guys, I feel like if you had something to hide and something was coming, you'd be kind of like neutral or like keep you kind of coping, but this is not. I'm just reading it poorly, but I don't know. They look to be kind of chilling. We'll see. Guys, can they build, can they further up, build their cross-exam as they go, like right now? Because they probably predicted most of what they would say, or most of the bullshit. So they already have counter-argument and counter question to most of it. But they're still building a little bit more based on what is said that they didn't predict or didn't see was going to happen, or does it say, right? Makes sense. Can't that be kind of risky sometimes, where you ask a question that you're like, oh, we're gonna gotten them, and then they give an answer that's very elaborate and completely smokes you, and even gives more information, like that could still be kind of risky. Let's see. She was in bed joining Depp. No, it's not how it works. Okay. I guess I don't mean to be a party pooper or like the reasonable voice. Okay, but technically, like I said, she's just a forensic psychologist. Okay, she works with the information given to her. Okay, regardless of whether everything is legitimate or falsified or manipulated or exaggerated. Okay, this is a version that's given to her, and she makes a professional, expert, a report, diagnosis, and evaluation based on what she's given. So it can't be classified as hearsay, because they're asking what she did in those sessions, and what she reported on. What is her report and her professional thing? And guys, these documents, they hold value because she's like on boards, she's on a bunch of like, you know, like high grade shit or whatever, and she can't really falsify reports or whatnot. You could, but you're gonna put everything, your career, everything you stand for on the line for one client? I would assume not. So then, it cannot be hearsay because they're asking her what the reports were. They're literally asking. But I agree that this was a bit. I'll give you a chat though that this has been pretty fucking blunt though. It's been pretty hardcore. They are like barraging super hard. I don't know the terms. I only know video games. Okay, this is like a siege, a barrage. They're just like fucking, just fucking shooting everywhere pretty much. So I don't know. Like this is because if this makes you go ooh, imagine how the jury feels. It's kind of like their job to like understand and get this. So they're probably throwing it back a bunch. But if you think about it, it'll play really, really, really poorly for them if they ask a lot of questions about these events, and it's a lot of I don't recall. No, there wasn't proof. No, there wasn't this. No, there wasn't that. She's barraging a bunch, which means that the plaintiff can also barrage back to match it, right? And it's gonna be up to them to materialize the proof, the evidence, for the jury to feel like they weren't lied to and the testimony is genuine.
All right, so Dr. Hughes, let's go past that text.
This is not the
and talk
jury.
about,
These are fanboys. What are you talking about?
go past that text and continue after that text.
Sure. So there was, Mr. Depp apologized to Ms. Heard for that incident. Mr. Depp said in his UK testimony, well, I only maybe playfully tapped her on the back with my foot. Mr. Depp texted Paul Bettany and talked about how he was so drunk and out of control and engaged in bad behavior. He texted his friend Patty Smith a very similar type of text about how drunk and out of control he was. And then finally, Amber Heard wrote an email talking about how distressed and heartbroken she was.
Objection, hearsay.
Drunk, kicking? What is happening here?
I mean, I don't agree.
I know. Sustain. I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
All right. Can you give another example?
Email of
I
being
think those are all
drunk
I
equals
can,
kicking somebody down.
Remember at this point.
Okay. What if any?
Try again, lady.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go a little bit further here. So, you concluded that Amber Heard used psychological abuse and some reactive physical violence. I think I heard you say. Is that correct?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
Can you please explain to the jury what you meant by that?
Yes, that is correct. That, Amber Heard reported to me some of the behaviors that she used that were psychologically aggressive, the name calling, the putting him down and calling him very bad names and insulting his fatherhood. And she was very shamed and remorseful about that. She also indicated, using, and as some of the testing showed, minor forms of violence, pushing, shoving, throwing objects. We see that a lot with women when there's not proportional force. Women are more likely to throw objects. And then the more severe act of punching him, which a punch falls in the more severe category. And the context, as she explained it, was that he was coming after.
Yeah, this is fucking
her
cooked
sister,
up.
and she stood in the way and she punched him.
Now, does that make Amber Heard a perpetrator of intimate partner violence?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
So that was one of the tasks that I had to consider. That was one of the hypotheses that I had to consider. And given all of the other data, that was not my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Now, you stated that you read a number of therapy records. Please tell the jury, why are therapy records important?
Therapy records are critical for a forensic psychologist. When we have the opportunity to go back in time and see what a person was dealing with, what the content of their distress was, and what the symptoms of their distress was, it really gives us a snapshot in time. So they become very critical as part of the overall forensic psychological evaluation. Because we as psychologists
Sour Patch
understand
Kids enjoyer.
how people sort of treat in therapy and what to look for. So in looking back at Ms. Heard's therapy records, we see sort of real-time unfolding of this dynamic
Guys,
in
the
this
apps are from Twitch,
relationship.
just letting you guys know.
We see early on in her notes in her report with Bonnie Jacobs and in Dr. Bonnie Jacobs' notes, reports of constant concerns about Mr. Depp's substance abuse, constant concerns about him passing out and vomiting, constant concerns about not wanting
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
She can characterize that and say she relied on that.
Overruled.
Thank you. Please continue.
constant concerns about how do I get him into treatment, how do I get him help. Ms. Heard starts going to Al-Anon at this point, early 2012, in the beginning of the relationship, because she has to figure out and wants to figure out a way to support the man that she's dating right now and the man who she's falling madly in love with. There were reports in Dr. Jacobs' notes early on about his controlling behavior, about his jealousy behavior, about him not wanting to do certain jobs, of not wanting her to wear certain clothes. So this is going back to 2012.
To do a certain job?
With no indication of why would she be saying that, but
Not
for the
wanting to
sole
do a
purpose
job
of
is
trying to get help and
coercive
trying to get
behavior?
guidance in this relationship that she finds so difficult. There are indications, as I mentioned before, of the sexual assault and the sexual abuse and how he would, when he was angry and when he was drunk, it was mostly drug and alcohol fueled rage when he would, throw her on the bed and try to have sex with her. And then, if he was not able to perform, he would get more angry at her and blame her. So we have this dynamic of
This
blaming
unreasoning?
her
I guess
for
anything can be
his
done.
inability to take responsibility for his behavior. Those themes were
I have
throughout
to be so bad.
Dr.
Holy shit, I'm
Jacobs'
watching my on my
notes.
phone.
Did Dr. Jacobs assign any diagnoses to Amber Heard?
She did. Early
one?
on, she diagnosed her with panic disorder, and then later with post-traumatic stress disorder.
All right. And did Dr. Jacobs diagnose Amber Heard with borderline personality disorder?
No, she did not.
Histrionic personality disorder?
No, she did not.
And is that important?
That's very important when we're trying to figure out the course of somebody's illness, the course of somebody's psychiatric difficulties. As I stated, well, I don't think I got to state, personality disorders usually start in adolescence early.
Objection.
I'll sustain the objection. Next
Okay.
question.
Okay. You also stated that you reviewed Dr. Connell Cowan's treatment notes, correct?
Correct.
And you also read his deposition testimony?
Correct.
And you had how long of a collateral interview with him?
I believe it was 2 hours.
Okay. And what did you get from all of that data?
So by the time that she gets to Dr. Connell Cowan, which is 2014, I believe, September 2014 is when Dr. Kipper comes on the scene. Ms. Heard's psychological functioning is significantly deteriorated. She's suffering more anxiety, more sleeplessness, more agitation, more emotional dysregulation, this fluctuation in moods. And when you sort of look at the records of what happened in those first 2 years from Dr. Jacobs, and now we have up to Dr. Connell Cowan, and we see all of the incidents that she was exposed to, including the sexual violence and the coercive control, it makes sense to me that her status, her psychological functioning has deteriorated. And in Dr. Connell Cowan's notes, that's what he's always trying to do. He's trying to help Mr. Depp, help her act in a way so that Mr. Depp does not hurt her. Dr. Connell Cohen was very concerned for Amber Heard's safety, as was Dr. Bonnie Jacobs. Dr. Jacobs was very concerned for her safety, and she continued to talk about safety aspects for Ms. Heard, as was Connell Cohen. They did, both of them, both therapists, understood, and Ms. Heard talked to them about it, that there were times that she fought back and she used violence, and times that she screamed and she said things that she didn't want to. But nevertheless, that did not change the balance for them either, and they were very concerned that because of Mr. Depp's significant substance abuse and his sort of poorly controlled anger, that at some point he was going to seriously hurt her.
Did Dr. Cohen provide Ms. Heard with a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder?
No, he did not.
Did he diagnose Amber Heard with histrionic personality disorder?
No, he did not.
Is that important?
It's important that you have an individual, Ms. Heard, who's in therapy for over 2 years with one therapist and over 2 years with another therapist, and you're not seeing those characteristics of a personality disorder. If the manifestation of a person's difficulties and illness and symptomatology is better explained by another disorder, then you don't qualify for the personality disorder. You can't get the diagnosis. I mean, that's part of the criteria. So if it's not a pervasive pattern in a variety of contexts, and it can't be better explained by her trauma experience and the exposure and the symptoms as a result of that trauma,
go against what you said earlier?
Then you don't get a personality disorder. And that's why they didn't diagnose it.
Did you read Dr. Amy Banks' deposition testimony?
Yes, I did.
And what were her findings?
So Dr. Banks had one session, one couple session with Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard. Dr. Banks is very reputable. She works up at the Harvard Medical School Cambridge Victim of Violence Program, which is a very well-known program for understanding.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
It's non-responsive to the question. The question was, what was the findings?
All right.
Tell the jury who Dr. Amy Banks is.
And just like I said, so she's somebody who has a wealth of experience in understanding intimate partner violence and the dynamics of violent relationships. But she only had one session with the couple, and it was her determination when they were both there and the violence was talked about that Mr. Depp did not deny the violence that he perpetrated toward Ms. Heard. She also did, as everybody has, all of our other therapists, because Ms. Heard admitted as such, that she also used low levels of violence as well. So Dr. Amy Banks had that opinion.
Low levels of violence.
Did you review Dr.
Why is she always
Anderson's
downplaying
treatment
violence when it comes from women? I don't get it. It's so fucking annoying. It's just so dumb,
What was the
dude.
significance?
This is so sad for anybody at all.
So Dr. Anderson
cares about
similarly
fucking-
thought that there was violence and abuse in this relationship. She was
abuse
the
and
one
violence,
therapist
like,
out
what
of
the
the
fuck, man?
four who qualified it as mutual abuse, which the termination I've talked to you about, I don't necessarily agree with. But she did see and did understand that there was violence and abuse by Mr. Depp. What was most notable was that after the December 15th, 2015 episode, Ms. Heard called her, in addition to calling Connell Cohen, and reached out to a number of people. But she saw Dr. Anderson in her office, and Dr. Anderson saw 2 bruises on her face and told me, my husband kicked me, and he pushed me.
Then take a picture, motherfucker!
And should I call the police?
Objection, Your Honor.
What should
You're
I
saying.
do?
Holy fuck!
She's not reading, Your Honor. She's just saying the significance.
Sustain the objection. Next
Okay.
question.
All right. What were your
She did? Okay,
what
we'll see then.
conclusions did you make as a result of what you reviewed?
I
for
wish
Dr.
you would
Laura
say
Anderson?
that happened. No?
My take of
There
reading
is- we'll
Dr.
see then.
Laurel
Sorry, my
Anderson's
bad.
deposition and seeing
Just the
her,
way she's doing it is just
redacted
so
notes
annoying.
was that, from my professional opinion, this was a very serious incident and a very serious allegation of intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp. If a patient comes into my office with 2 bruises and alleges being pushed, shoved, and kicked by her partner, I'm going to be very concerned, and I'm going to mobilize a lot more resources to help that individual. And for some reason, that did not happen for Ms. Heard.
What are your overall clinical impressions from reading these notes from Amber Heard's treatment providers and their couples therapists?
Objection compound.
All right, sustained.
What are your overall clinical impressions from reading what you told everybody you read?
Objection compound.
I mean, I don't know how to get it less compound, Your Honor.
Overruled, go ahead.
Thank you.
So my overall impression of the treatment notes was, there's significant support for the fact that there was intimate partner violence in this relationship. It was consistently reported over time, and there were couples therapists who saw and understood that. There were, Mr. Depp also attended a session with Dr. Connell Cohen with Ms. Heard. And in that session, he was very belligerent and mean and yelling and intimidating, and he even got up and stormed out, rolled a joint, and then came back later. Dr. Connell Cohen's impression was this is somebody who's poorly controlled. That's the same thing that Dr. Laurel Anderson said about him.
Wait,
and he stormed out of one of those
and-
sessions too. So there were a total of 6 sessions, couple session, but Mr. Depp stormed out of 2 of them. So there were only 4 couple sessions for these 2 individuals in this just highly volatile, highly damaging relationship that was, punctuated by the coercive control and the intimate partner violence.
What, if any, observations did you make about Amber Heard's psychological status over that period?
I mean, the record was very clear that her psychological status deteriorated as she was in the relationship with Mr. Depp. She kept getting worse. She was losing weight. By the end, she was down to, I think, 105 pounds from about 125, 130. She was taking significantly more medication than she's ever taken in her life. She was having more panic, more anxiety, more distress. More affect dysregulation.
Guys, is she medicated?
An inability
just
to
wondering.
regulate her mood, more anger
Does she take a medication for
so it can significantly
whatever
deteriorate over
thing she
time.
has? Like what?
You talked about weight. What, if any, diagnoses did Bonnie Jacobs make about Amber Heard having an eating
I'm gonna keep it
disorder?
a bug. That sounds like Addie.
There was no evidence in the record that Ms. Heard had an eating disorder.
What, if any, observations did you make about whether Dr. Connell thought she had an eating disorder?
There was no indication in his record that she had an eating disorder.
Now, what, if any, observations did you make about the impact
She does
of
like Addie.
substance
Okay,
abuse?
So the substance abuse was a very relevant and complicating factor to this relationship. When you pair that level of substance abuse with the level of intimate partner violence and
Says
coercive
me.
control, it's a very, very disastrous mix. And one of the things that happens with the substance abuse is a very similar dynamic that happens with the intimate partner violence. That there's the lying, there's the hiding, there's the cheating, there's the obfuscation, the rationalization about the drinking, the rationalization about the violence, the trying to, promises, I'm going to do better, I'm going to get clean and sober, I'm not going to hit you anymore.
Objection,
So
Your
all-
Honor. Can I be heard?
You can approach.
Man, they talked about a lot in those 23 hours Zoom calls. These must have been some fucking action-packed fucking caffeine-infused Adderall injected fucking juicers, dude. Like a fucking helicopter. What? I'm saying, man, it's a lot. It's a lot of juice, man. Read the chat. How is she allowed to practice psychiatry? Calling forms of abuse minor and forms of violence. I actually agree with this. Chat, yes, I know this is something that not a lot of people are going to agree with, okay? I'm not a professional of any kind, okay? I think, yes, when it comes down to it, yeah, there's degree and whatnot. When it comes down to, when we talk about violence, violence is violence, okay? And sometimes your intent is to be harmful and violent, right? And the result is that you don't cause a lot of harm. but that shouldn't mean that it's to be downplayed, and it's not a lot, and it's minor. Okay, intent, result, gravity, these things gonna mix up. Like, you can't say, oh, dude, I tried to fucking punch him at the back of the head so he would fucking fall down the stairs and fucking die, but I only weighed 80 pounds, and it only scratched him, and he fucking knocked me the fuck out afterwards. This cocksucker, I can't believe he did that. And it's like, well, you know, like, because it's a minor punch, or minor because you didn't get there, like, and you know, that makes sense though. That makes sense. Like, sometimes there is intent to harm, intent to go hard. What you want is to harm and whatnot. Who did this? Guys, who did this one?
What, if any, dynamics and coping styles are connected to the substance abuse by Mr. Depp?
So they share similarities. There's a lot of lying when somebody's a substance abuser. There's a lot of hiding. There's a lot of concealment. There's a lot of rationalization. There's a lot of blame, blaming your partner for your inability to stay clean and sober. There's a lot of the promises to change and the promises to get better. So a lot of these dynamics sort of co-occur, you know, in a situation of substance abuse and domestic violence. They're very similar. The difficulty in this relationship was that the majority of the violent episodes and the sexually violent episodes were in these alcohol and drug-fueled rages. That was predominantly when those happened. When he wasn't in those stages, we still saw the obsessive jealousy and the coercive control and the possessiveness. That still persisted. But when the alcohol and the drugs came together is when Amber Heard was more in danger of being hurt by him.
Why didn't Amber Heard leave the relationship sooner?
Well, I mean, you know why.
Objection, speculation, Your Honor.
Have you formed, based on your experience and based on your 29 hours of clinical evaluation of Amber Heard, what is your
Zoom call.
understanding of why Amber Heard didn't leave the relationship earlier?
Objection beyond the scope of the disclosure.
It clearly is not. I mean, it's clearly in the disclosure. Point to where you say it's not. I mean,
Point to where you say it's not.
You're-
Could you come forward?
29 hour Zoom call, boys. Holy shit, making me look like a fucking weakling with these long ass streams, dude. I'm a fucking rookie. These guys are fucking marathoning up in this bitch. Holy dude. Actual fucking psychological chads. I'm just playing, guys. Come on, man. The judge seems okay. I mean, guys, I didn't pass the bar. I'm not a fucking lawyer, dude. And this is a judge, which is like, you know, kind of, I would assume, high tier in law. So it's kind of hard to say. It's kind of hard to call the judge biased or bad when, like, I mean, most of us don't know shit about law, and these are like kind of like elites. So like, I don't know. She seems fine to me. Everybody has bias. That's the human nature. We all have bias one way or another. That's how it is.
now you indicated that your main opinion was that Amber Heard's report of violence and abuse in her relationship with Mr. Depp is consistent with what is known as intimate partner violence, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And why did you believe that Amber Heard, what formed your basis of that opinion, in a nutshell?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled, I'll allow it.
The basis of the opinion was looking at all the dynamics in this relationship, looking at not just the hitting and the yelling, but looking at how much more hitting was done, looking at the coercive control, the obsessive jealousy, the possessiveness, the sexual violence, the choking behavior, the threats to kill. Those are all, as I stated, very significant and often found in cases of lethal domestic violence. Those were significant severity factors, and looking at all those, that's what tipped the scales, that even though she yelled and said some horrible things and hit him, it never was able to shift the balance of power and control.
No, it's very
in that
lethal. Very lethal.
relationship.
This is a hologram.
Now, you
This is a hologram.
have discussed with Amber Heard, and you have reviewed and evaluated the emotional impact on Amber Heard as a result of emotional distress as a result of the 3 counterclaim statements, correct? The 3 alleged defamatory statements made by Mr. Depp through Mr. Waldman, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Objection,
And-
compound leading.
Oh, double.
Just
Overall, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you please tell the jury what psychological impact these statements had on Amber Heard?
Yes, so
Wait,
there
what
were 3
statements?
statements that I evaluated. May I check my notes to give you
Fuck,
the dates
no,
and
you
my
may not.
recollection so that I can be clear?
Since I couldn't put it in, that might be the fastest way, Your Honor.
I'd rather she not address the court. I mean,
I'm sorry. Yes. you
Okay.
can- Yes.
So there were 3 statements on April 8th, 2020, April 27th, 2020, and June 24th, 2020 that I queried her about and asked her about. The one that, what happens is if somebody who, like Ms. Heard, has trauma-based symptoms and PTSD, we say that PTSD is a cue-based disorder. There are things that happen in the environment that trigger it and make it worse. And have to refute that your report of violence and abuse is a hoax makes that trauma activated. So it makes the PTSD symptoms at that time become more intense and more severe. So she would have more intrusive thoughts, more nightmares, more sleeplessness, more difficulty engaging with other people, depression, sadness, stress. All of that would happen when one of these statements came out. The one that was, the most difficult was the one where they said that her sexual violence
Objection, Your
was
Honor.
a hoax.
She's reading.
what's the objection?
I think she's going to the, to.
Oh, I'll overrule objection. Go ahead.
Please continue.
The one that was most difficult for Ms. Heard was the statement about
Okay, let her read then.
sexual violence
What-
a hoax. As I stated
why bother
earlier,
having these rules or whatever?
most women
She
try
just does
very
this.
Diligently to
Just-
put that sexual
Dude,
violence.
ask for pause,
in a
get her a
box,
fucking
bury
teleprompter,
it down,
please, get her-
not want to talk about
Get
it,
the fucking
not
stand,
wanna,
teleprompter, mirror, the whole
have
wazoo, man.
anything related to it come up. And, she's done, by my estimation in her coping, although she suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, she also has a high degree of coping strategies. But when this would happen, it sort of everything would deteriorate. And this is the one thing that women are always afraid of, that no one's going to believe them. No one's going to take them seriously. And when somebody comes out in the popular media and calls your experience a hoax, that lended itself to more severe psychological and traumatic symptomatology for her.
Dr. Hughes, are all of your opinions that you have provided today within a reasonable degree of psychological probability or certainty?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right.
Guys,
Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a
someone
good
let her
time
know
to
that-
go ahead and break for the day. We can have cross-examination and redirect tomorrow of this witness, of Dr. Hughes. So
Tomorrow!
you could have a good evening. Do not discuss the case with anybody, and don't do any outside research, okay? And we'll see you in the morning. Thank you.
Tomorrow. I'm not gonna stand up. Give me contempt. I'm going to jail.
Okay. All right, Dr. Hughes, since you're still in the middle of your testimony, please don't discuss your testimony with anybody, including the attorneys, okay? And anything that you looked at, referenced during your direct examination, if you could just turn that over so they can review that before cross-examination, okay? All right, thank you,
Your
ma'am.
Honor, may I just, I presume she wants to be able to take that back with her. and
We can
review
get copies
overnight.
of it. We'll get whatever it is.
Okay, good.
We'll make sure you get copies of it.
Ah,
you get
surely.
copies of it so she can keep her originals. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
I have copies of everything that I looked at. Other than
Okay,
my
well, no, we're not talking right now. Court's in session.
than my
Thank you.
post-it note.
All right. So anything else then? So we'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m., correct? All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
No talking to attorneys, cap. Guys, I'm not a lawyer, chat, but I don't get this. A lot of the barraging, they'll be able to prepare and be able to come up with some shit overnight for tomorrow. No? Cause she shot a lot of shots there. That was it was crazy. I assume they would put on a stand for cross-exam right now, and she'd have to fucking answer for all the smoke she put out. But then she's going home. But then now she's going home. Huh? Is that how it works? Guys, they stalled for 2.5 hours of her just saying her qualifications and when she went to school and who she had lunch with and who was her last patient in 1994. Like, what the fuck?